Hey dreamers, welcome back. Cozy up, hit like and subscribe, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more bedtime stories. Drop your location and time below. Take a deep breath. And let's begin.
It began with the chanting, soft and distant, carried on the wind like a promise or a warning. The five of us had driven into the forest at dusk, tires crunching over gravel, headlights cutting swaths of orange through the gathering twilight. We'd come for solitude, for the thrill of discovery. An ancient monastery, left to ruin centuries ago, its stones moss-clad and half swallowed by brambles. My camera, slung around my neck, felt heavy with anticipation. Maybe we'd document the crumbling arches, the faded frescoes rumored to still ghost the chapel walls. Instead, we found something dark and patient, waiting just beyond the tree line. We pitched our tents in a clearing rimmed by oak and yew, the ruins standing like hulking silhouettes against a charcoal sky. The air smelled of damp earth and decay. I lit the fire, and the flames sputtered upward, chasing away the shadows that clung to broken masonry. Beneath the skeletal remains of the cloister, we could hear the low hum of insects, the rustle of leaves, and if we strained to listen, the murmur of voices. "Probably just wind," Mark said, tossing another log onto the fire. He propped his boots against a smoldering ember, wiggling his toes. "Old buildings like this breathe." Lena shrugged and ran a finger over the moss-slick stone, disturbing a glossy slug. "Still gives me the creeps." I adjusted the lens on my camera. "Let's split up tomorrow. We'll meet back here for lunch, check out the nave, then hike to that waterfall." They both looked at me, the same flicker of unease in their eyes. We'd done weekend trips before, climbing abandoned mills, spelunking in caves, but nothing had ever felt quite like this. Night deepened, and the forest closed in. We played cards in the firelight, laughter thin around the edges. My phone buzzed, no signal, but a flashlight beam glowed in the gloom beyond our tents, as though someone stood watching. I stared until it vanished. "Did you guys see that?" I blurted. "Maybe a lost hiker," Lena whispered. "Or a prank," Mark said. He stood, stretched, and ambled toward the ruins, curiosity pushing him forward. I grabbed my jacket. "Wait up." We crossed the clearing toward the chapel's collapsed doorway. My breath puffed white, and footsteps crunched on fallen stones. Inside, moonlight filtered through gaping windows, revealing littered pews and shattered pillars. A chill settled over me. Then we heard it again, a soft, rhythmic chanting, like many voices singing in unison. The pitch was low and guttural, words unintelligible but ancient. Mark stiffened. "This isn't right," he muttered. We edged deeper, flashlights sweeping across walls carved with angels and saints, their faces eroded by time. The chanting grew louder, resonant, filling the nave with an otherworldly pulse. I raised my camera, fingers trembling. At the altar stood 5 figures in hooded robes, their faces hidden in shadow. They turned as one, the chant dying on their lips. I flicked the flash, and the beam revealed gaunt faces, skin whitened as parchment, eyes shining like wet pebbles. "Guests," one said, voice hollow as a crypt. My heart itched. They slipped their hoods back to reveal emaciated monks, garments threadbare and stained with ash. Something uneasy twisted in my gut. "We brought offerings," the tallest murmured, holding out a charred wooden bowl. Inside, the ember of a smoking candle wavered. Lena stumbled back. We didn't know anyone would be here." The monk smiled, a fraction, revealing teeth like ivory shards. "You are welcome to join us." We backed toward the entrance. The chanting resumed, slow and hypnotic, and I felt my limbs go heavy, my mind swimming in a fog. The flame in the bowl grew, casting dancing shadows that writhed against the walls like living things. I yanked Lena's arm. "Let's go." Outside, the empyrean of stars was gone, swallowed by a roiling black ceiling of cloud. The fire in our clearing had died to embers. We heard footsteps behind us, soft, deliberate, 5 sets of footsteps echoing across the stones. We ran. My flashlight swung wildly, illuminating broken columns, toppled statues, and beneath them, traces of fresh footprints in the moss. They were oddly defined, crisp as if pressed yesterday, not centuries ago. At the edge of the clearing, Mark grabbed my shoulder, spinning me around. The monks stood in a semicircle, their eyes fixed on us, mouths moving in silent prayer. Beneath their cloaks, ribs knotted and thighs hollowed, as though their bodies had been drained of flesh. One raised a gnarled hand and beckoned. I felt it deep in the part of me that knew fear. "Stay," the voice whispered. We tore past the tents, up the gravel road, adrenaline slurping through our veins. The forest seemed to stretch on forever, each step swallowed by the hush. Branches snagged at my clothes like fingers. I fell twice, scrabbling to my feet, chest ripping with each breath. Behind me, receding but never gone, I heard the chant, soft, insistent, promising reunion. We didn't stop until the headlights of Lena's truck pierced the gloom, bright and surreal. She gunned the engine, and we tumbled inside, slamming doors shut. In the rearview, I swore I saw a figure standing at the road's edge, robes brushing the gravel, head bowed. Back in town, the morning light felt brutal, too white, too honest. We huddled in a diner, sipping bitter coffee. None of us spoke for a long time. Did anyone else notice, Lena finally whispered, that their robes looked like they were made of skin? Mark paled. I thought I was imagining it. I thumbed through my camera. The first few photos were of moss and fallen beams, but then came the flash shot of the monks. The image revealed their gaping eye sockets, the furrows in their cheeks like dried clay, and the dark hollows beneath their sternums, holes that pulsed with shadow. "Let's delete these," Lena said, voice cracking. But I couldn't. In the back of my mind, I heard the chant, waiting, promising acceptance. That night, I lay awake, eyes open to darkness. Every rustle on the street outside sounded like a footstep in the forest. My phone vibrated, a text from an unknown number. "We await your return." I stared at it until the screen went dark, pulse pounding. I tossed and turned, imagining the monastery's silhouette framed by fog, the monks' invitation echoing through time. The next day, I drove back to the site alone. I told myself it was to retrieve my camera, to erase the evidence. But as I turned off the highway and onto the gravel road, I felt a pull, like gravity. The forest welcomed me with damp arms. I parked where we once camped. The clearing was overgrown, as though abandoned for centuries. The fire ring had been reclaimed by ferns. I stepped forward, heart hammering, until I stood before the ruins once more. No chanting greeted me, only silence, thick and expectant. I lifted my camera, hesitated, then clicked a single flash. In the flash's glare, I thought I saw them, the monks, lined up in the nave, waiting. Their eyes glimmered in the sudden light, pale and unblinking. The flash died. The ruins were empty. The echo of their presence lingered like a sigh. I slipped my camera into my bag and turned to leave, but the air shifted. A coldness rolled in, and from the shattered archway came the murmur of chants, distant, sure, unending. I froze. The monks' voices swelled, rising in devotion. In that moment, I understood what they offered. Not salvation, but oblivion. Not peace, but transformation. Acceptance into their silent brotherhood, bound by ash and shadow, where flesh decayed, but the spirit endured. My legs moved before my mind could protest. I stepped across the threshold, heart racing. The ruined stones closed behind me, and the night swallowed me whole. Behind me, the forest exhaled. The chanting resumed, soft as a lullaby, welcoming its newest guest into eternal communion. The first time I saw my reflection hesitate, I laughed it off as fatigue, and so did my eyes, until I realized how wrong they'd been. I arrived at Mirror Lake just before sunset, the sky bleeding rose and violet across the still water. The deep forest pressed in on three sides, firs and maples tangled together like ancient sentinels. A single dirt road wound in from the highway, erasing all signs of civilization. I parked my Jeep under a canopy of branches, grabbed my pack, and followed a narrow trail to the water's edge. The air smelled of pine resin, damper, and something older, something that lurked beneath the polished surface of that glassy lake. I set up camp on a flat spit of grass, close enough that I could dip my hand in the water without getting my boots wet. Without thinking, I peered into the lake, studying my reflection. Tired eyes, stubbled jaw, hat pulled low against the chill. I waved, and my reflection waved back, only there was a fraction of a second's delay. I frowned. Perhaps my mind was playing tricks, the way it sometimes did after long hours hiking alone. I shook my head and returned to setting up the tent. By the time I finished, twilight had deepened into indigo. I lit a small campfire, the crackle of wood and the musk of smoke a welcome comfort. I boiled water for instant coffee and settled on a log, staring into the flames, letting exhaustion pull at the corners of my mind. Somewhere behind me the forest sighed, leaves whispering secrets I could not decipher. The lake lay calm and unreadable in the distance. I stirred my coffee and glanced up. In the firelight, shapes danced among the trees, branches that might have been fingers, shadows that might have been faces. I blinked and they were gone. My heart thudded. I told myself that this was solitude talking, that I was safe. After all, I was miles from any trailhead used by hikers. No one ever ventured here. I was alone with my thoughts, my camera, and whatever it was that lingered in the darkness. Sleep came fitfully. My dreams were tangled. I dreamed I peered into the water and saw not my own face, but a pair of dull, glassy eyes staring back with languid malevolence. In another dream, I dove under the surface to touch my reflection, and instead felt cold, rotting scales. I awoke with my heart pounding, sweat chilling on my skin, convinced that I'd heard whispering just beyond my tent. But when I budged the flap, there was nothing but the silent forest and the impossibly still lake. Morning light was a relief. I brewed fresh coffee and examined the lake's edge. The water was too perfect, as though someone had polished its surface by hand. There were no ripples, not even from the breeze. I dangled a toe in, felt its icy grip, then pulled back. Then I noticed the footprints, 2 sets, side by side, leading from my tent to the shoreline. Only I hadn't been down here in the night. I traced my fingers through the shallow, muddy edge, nothing but my own prints. I stared across the water, half expecting to see someone standing there, mirrored in the glass. Of course, there was no one. I spent most of the day circumnavigating the lake, mapping the shoreline with my GPS, checking for hidden paths or signs of other campers. Nothing. The forest was pristine. No human debris, no discarded cans, no charred coals from another fire. As evening fell, I felt a mounting tension, as though the lake waited for darkness to reveal its true nature. I resisted the urge to stare at that flawless surface, but by late afternoon I found myself drawn back again and again, watching my reflection in silence. On the third night, I dared to bring a mirror down to the water's edge. By torchlight, I positioned it at an angle, expecting to see only my face repeated. Instead, the lake's reflection wavered as though disturbed by ripples, though the water remained motionless. My mirrored image in the hand mirror flickered, stretched, and briefly smiled when I did not. I dropped the mirror, the crack echoing like a gunshot. My heartbeat roared in my ears. I stumbled back, tripped on a root, and the mirror shattered at my side. When I looked up, I was alone. The lake sat unmoving, dark and inscrutable. That night, The air felt charged like the moment before a storm. I huddled in my sleeping bag, sleeping with one eye open. At 3:17 a.m., I awoke to the faintest sound, a soft splash, as if someone had just dipped a finger into the water. I froze, listening. Nothing. The minutes stretched. I closed my eyes and told myself I was imagining it. But the moment I drifted back towards sleep, I heard it again. A deliberate, measured splash coming closer. I crawled out of the tent, heart racing so hard I could feel the pulse in my throat. I grabbed my flashlight and crept to the lake's edge. The beam cut through the dark to reveal footprints in the damp mud, human footprints, indented and glistening with dew, trailing off into the water so that they ended abruptly at the shoreline. No exit marks. It was as if whoever or whatever had walked across the surface of the earth vanished at the water's edge. My breath hitched. I shone the flashlight over the black water. It was like staring into an abyss. No bottom visible, no insect skimming the surface, no mirror-like sheen. Just endless dark. I stumbled back to my tent and spent the rest of the night wide awake, listening for splashes, whispers, footsteps. At dawn, I packed up and drove to the nearest town for food and signal. My hands shook as I scrolled through messages, as though a static current ran beneath my skin. I bought extra supplies, jerky, ramen, soda, and stared at the sky, trying to calm my mind. I told myself I'd return, pack up, and head home. Get some sleep, maybe see a doctor. This place had gotten under my skin. I needed to leave. But that evening, I found myself on the road again, headlights slipping past pine silhouettes. The lake called me back. Its perfect calm beckoned. I told myself I was strong, twice as careful. I would set up camp further away this time, keep my distance. I arrived at dusk, set my tent 50 yards from the water, and sat on a rock staring across the treetops. The lake lay placid, reflecting the moon as if it were a silver coin sunk beneath glass. I cracked open a beer and exhaled. Let it go, I thought. But something in the corner of my eye caught me, movement, almost imperceptible, beneath the surface. I squinted. The moonlight shimmered on stone like shapes drifting just below the water. Rocks? Logs? No, a face. The contours of a human face, eyes closed, as if asleep. Then the face pressed against the underside of the surface, eyes opening, staring right at me with a wet, blank gaze. My blood turned to ice. I swallowed, and the face vanished as though it had never been. The beer slipped from my fingers. I grabbed my flashlight and dashed to the shoreline. I lifted my legs over the mossy bank and got as close as I dared. Hello? My voice sounded small, swallowed by the trees. I scanned the water, but saw only my own reflection, perfectly still. No lapping waves, no drifting logs, only me staring back. I reached out a trembling hand. My reflection mimicked me in exact timing this time, no lag. So I jerked my arm violently. Nothing. My reflection stayed placid, mouth closed, eyes empty. Panic flared. I yanked my hand back, hearing it thud against the muddy shore. The reflection smiled. A slow, deliberate smile that did not match my terrified expression. I raised my flashlight so the beam sliced across the water, illuminating the reeds and submerged roots. Nothing moved, but in the edges of my vision I felt something watching, a presence at my back. I spun around, but the forest was empty, only my campfire flickering. I realized I'd lost my camera. In my haste, I must have dropped it back at the tent. I couldn't leave it. My fingers shook, but I turned my gaze back to the lake. My reflection had tilted its head, as if curious. It beckoned with one finger, a tiny, hypnotic gesture. Come closer, it seemed to say. My mind rebelled, but my feet moved forward. drawn by some force I couldn't name. I stepped onto the bank. The mud was slick beneath my boots. I pushed through ferns and snags, edging closer until I was only inches from the surface. My reflection's hand pressed through the water's skin as though it were liquid glass, fingers splayed on the outside. It opened its mouth, wider than I could without feeling pain, and let out a sound like water through a broken dam. It gurgled my name. Jeremy. The voice was soft, coaxing, filled with longing. A sob broke free from my throat. I took another step, toes curling over the edge of the bank. My heart hammered against my ribs. I wanted to turn, to run back to camp, but my legs wouldn't move. I leaned forward, drawn to that silent smile. My fingertips brushed the water. It rippled unnaturally, as though the surface were elastic. I stared down into that oily black mirror, into eyes that were mine but lacked soul. And then I felt it, a pull, gentle but irresistible, tugging at my arm, my shoulder, my very core. The water shimmered. The reflection's mouth opened wider, rows of glassy, serrated teeth glinting in the moonlight. It choked out a single word. Join me. My world narrowed to the space between me and that beckoning face. I closed my eyes, expecting cold water to rush over me. But instead I heard the snap of a twig behind me. I flinched and bolted upright. Moonlight gleamed on the blade held by a figure standing only a few feet away, another hiker, wild-eyed, skin pale as chalk. He wore a soaked flannel shirt and clutched a hunting knife. You can't do this, he rasped. Not again. He lunged and I stumbled back. In the flash of the knife's edge, I glimpsed a dark smear, blood, ink. The forest held its breath. I screamed, whatever courage I'd summoned vanishing. I turned and ran, crashing through undergrowth, ears ringing with my own ragged breathing. The stranger followed me, footsteps pounding. I didn't stop until I tripped over a root, face planting in the dirt. My hands clawed at the ground. I struggled to my knees and risked a glance over my shoulder. He stood on the bank, knife raised, eyes blazing in the flash of my headlamp. Don't look back, he bellowed. If you flee, it'll claim you. I scrambled upright and tore through the woods, branches whipping my face, robbing me of sense of direction. A blinding pain lanced through my ankle. I twisted it, but I kept going, fueled by terror. Finally, I burst onto the dirt road. The stranger materialized behind me, then halted at the tree line, knife lowered. His chest heaved, eyes fixed on the woods. I limped to the Jeep, keys shaking in my hand. I fumbled with the lock, then snarled the engine awake. As I peeled away, I dared a glance back. By the lake's edge, a shape stood, tall and still, a dark silhouette framed against the glassy water. It raised a hand in farewell. In the days since, I've tried to tell my story. Authorities found no footprints, no signs of another hiker, no knife. They chalked it up to exhaustion or hallucination. My rescue party searched the lake. No submerged bodies, no twist of steel. They even dredged the shallows. Nothing. I still have the scar on my ankle, the twisted tendon. I have the nightmares. Cold fingers wrapping around my throat as I float weightless beneath the surface, my lungs aching. Sometimes in the mirror, I see that smile in my own reflection. And sometimes, when I'm alone, I feel the pull again, gentle, inexorable, calling me back to the place where water becomes glass, and a reflection waits to claim your soul. So I warn you, if you ever find yourself drawn to a lake so still it looks like a polished mirror, resist the urge to stare. Never wave. Never smile back. And above all, never let your reflection beckon you closer, because once you do, the surface will shatter, and you will step through into something that looks just like you, but knows only hunger. Beware the mirror lake. It's waiting. I never believed in ghosts until I saw her standing right behind me in the mirror, fractured moonlight outlining her rib-thin frame and eyes wide with horror. I had moved into the old Edwardian townhouse 2 months ago, charmed by its tall ceilings, stained glass windows, and the antique oval mirror hanging above the fireplace in the parlor. From the moment I unpacked, the mirror fascinated me. It was too ornate to be modern, its gilded frame carved with twisting vines and half-hidden faces that seemed to leer when I wasn't looking directly at them. My friends joked that it looked like a portal, but I laughed it off. After all, I wasn't the kind to lie awake at night, worried about demons. That changed on the third night after daylight savings time. I'd gone to bed early, exhausted from moving boxes and scrubbing years of dust from every molding. At exactly 2:37 a.m., my eyes fluttered open. The house was silent. I rolled over, reached for the lamp on my nightstand, and froze. Reflected in the hallway mirror at the foot of my bed was someone else, a pale, frail woman draped in what looked like an old-fashioned nightgown, her hair tangled and matted. She stood motionless, as if carved from smoke. My pulse thundered against my ribs. 1,000 thoughts slammed through me at once. An intruder, sleep paralysis, a hallucination. I blinked, and she was gone. I convinced myself it was exhaustion. Desk deep in paperwork, I chided myself. Logical explanation, overwork, shadows. I stopped sleeping with the hallway light off, leaving a soft glow that banished all but the closest corners into darkness. The presence never returned in my bedroom, but the parlor, where the mirror hung, called to me. I began taking my laptop and coffee into the parlor each afternoon, working at the small desk facing the mirror. I told myself I needed the sunlight, the change of scenery. Whenever I glanced up, I'd catch the mirror's surface quivering, like ripples on water. But there was no breeze, no draft through closed windows. Once, my reflection hesitated as I raised a hand. My mirrored arm paused a fraction of a second before moving. I stared. The glass winked at me, and I turned away, heart pounding. By the time I noticed my reflection playing out tiny variations, smiling a touch too late, tilting its head when I stayed still, I was too afraid to leave the parlor. I convinced myself I was losing my mind, that lack of sleep was warping my senses. I started keeping a notebook beside me during the day, jotting down every oddity. Mirrored eyebrows raised 0.3 seconds late. Reflection's mug half smile fades. But when I looked back, my scrupulous notes had twisted into jagged scrawls, ink smeared as if someone had rubbed it with damp fingers. The words were wrong, not what I'd written at all. I stopped recording. I stopped smiling at the mirror. At night, I taped over the glass with black trash bags, securing the edges with duct tape in a spiderweb pattern. If the threshold to another world existed, I refused to look. Sleep returned, but dreams clawed at me, visions of water-logged rooms, faces pressed to glass, lips mouthing silent pleas. Every time I woke, I felt the warmth of someone's hand cupping my own, only to find empty sheets. 3 days ago, I came home to find the trash bags torn down. The mirror stood fully revealed, my reflection staring back, pale and unblinking. My heart lurched. I reached out to confirm it was me. My fingers brushed the cool glass, and the reflection did too. But the eyes that stared back were too dark, hollowed, and in them lay a dreadful intelligence. I yanked my hand away and left the room. That night, I dreamed of a door, a low, arched door carved into black marble, set into the floor of the parlor. I knelt and reached for its handle. Cold metal, slick with moisture. As I opened it, tendrils of shadow coiled upward, the mirror's surface rippling like disturbed water. I heard a woman gasp, at last. Then I woke. Bleary-eyed, I stared at the ceiling. Moonlight edged the curtains. My phone read 3:14 a.m. I sat up. Something tugged at me, an urgent tug at my chest, drawing me toward the parlor. I tried to resist, but my feet carried me down the hall. The mirror made no sound as I stepped inside. I flicked on the lamp. The glass was still until it breathed. The surface swooshed, and instead of my reflection, I saw the same frail woman from that first night. Her nightgown hung in strips, skin pale as paper. She smiled sadly, as if relieved. Her eyes flicked down to my hand on the lamp switch, as though recognizing my soul in the motion. My blood went cold. "I'm here," I choked out, voice cracking. "Who are you?" My reflection, or her, tilted her head and pressed her palm to the inside of the glass. I found myself mimicking the movement on the outside. When our hands met at the same point, the glass pulsed as if alive. Vertigo spiraled through me. "I am you," she whispered, though her mouth didn't move. The sound slithered into my mind. "I am what you will become." I stumbled backward. "No, you're not me." Her lips curved into a sad smile. "I am. And I'm here to show you, to prepare you." I laughed, a broken sound. "Prepare me? For what?" She raised her hand, and the mirror darkened beyond the edges, like oil spreading across water. In the depths, I saw scenes from my life, yet they twisted into nightmares. Me at my own funeral, headstone cracked. Me alone in a mansion of mirrors, endlessly hunting a reflection that never matched. Me trapped behind glass, screaming to be let out. Each vision lasted only an instant, but I recognized the faces, the rooms. They were mine, my future. I clamped my hands over my ears to block the whisper of her voice. But the glass creaked, and I heard her chanting as though from a mile away. Slowly, I lowered my hands, unable to resist. The words etched themselves into my mind. "Midnight comes. The reflection stays. Break the glass, release the shade. One step across, and you will see a future locked within the mirror's key." I staggered back, vision swimming. A gust of wind rattled the windows, though I was certain they were all closed. Candlelight flickered from the hallway sconce, though none had been lit. The parlor grew cold, breath turning to mist. My reflection smiled. Time is short. I tore myself away and fled down the hall, heart hammering. I barricaded the parlor door with a chair and a heavy side table. Leaning against it, gasping, I tried to steady my nerves. I couldn't think clearly. Half of me wanted to smash the mirror, chip away at it, shatter it into 1,000 glittering shards. The other half knew better. Some doors, once broken, cannot be closed again. I spent yesterday researching. The townhouse had once belonged to a stage magician in the 1920s, rumored to dabble in seances and spirit-binding illusions. Obituaries mentioned that his assistant, or lover, died in a bizarre accident on stage, her body crushed beneath collapsing scenery. Some whispered the magician trapped her soul in his enchanted mirror, glimpses of her silhouette seen by servants in the dead of night. I found a yellowed news clipping in the city archives, a grainy photograph of that very mirror, propped above the fireplace, the assistant's gaunt face white as chalk. By dusk, I knew what I had to do. I returned to the parlor with tools, rubber gloves, a pry bar, industrial cleaner, and blankets. My hands trembled so badly I spilled the can of cleaner across the rug. I almost walked away, but the cleaner ate through the fabric to reveal a faint engraving beneath. A single word carved into the wood paneling under the mirror's ledge. Bind. My jaw dropped. Bind. The word pulsed with power, as if daring me to act. Sweat beaded at my hairline. I gripped the pry bar and knelt. Under the mirror's frame, a slender seam ran between the glass and the wood. If the assistant's soul were bound here, perhaps I could unbind it by reversing the ritual, free her, close the portal, restore balance. But I sensed danger. The reflection had warned me, threatened me. Whatever lived on the other side would not go gently. I pressed the pry bar into the seam and levered gently. The glass creaked, and a face pressed out from within. My face, twisted in anguish, mouth open in a silent scream. I yanked back, nearly toppling over. The reflection's voice echoed. It's begun. I lunged forward, dragging the bar along the edge. The frame snapped free with a crack like a gunshot. I staggered, jarred, my ears ringing. The mirror tilted forward. The assistant's pale hand, fragile as glass itself, slipped from the edge and extended toward me. I froze, tears stinging my eyes. She looked at me with longing. Behind her, the dimensions of the mirror deepened into a yawning void. She whispered, "Help me." I watched her lips form that plea, as mournful as an ocean swell. Everything in me ached to reach out, to touch her cold hand and free her. "I will," I whispered. I knelt and grasped her wrist, pulling gently. The mirror's surface rippled, stretching like liquid silver. I braced myself and tugged harder. Suddenly, a burst of pain shot through my shoulder. I screamed, dropping the pry bar. A web of cracks spidered across the glass. The assistant's eyes widened in shock. My reflection, my proper reflection, the one that looked like me, popped into view at the opposite corner, betraying her by staring at me with tear-filled eyes. She opened her mouth to scream, but no sound came. With a final wrench, the mirror shattered. Shards rained down around me, tipping in slow motion. All at once, the parlor exploded in light. The assistant's hand slipped free. Her body solidified, collapsing to the floor in a heap of pale limbs. I stood, panting, staring at her still form. Then the light winked out. Darkness swallowed the room. I knelt and pressed my palm to her cheek, cold but alive. She stirred, eyes fluttering open, and smiled faintly. "Thank you," she breathed. A tremor shivered through the floorboards. I glanced up. Every shard of glass, every fragment of the mirror was reassembling itself in midair, weaving back into the gilded frame. The wall behind it rippled, like water draining down a sink. In moments, the mirror hung whole again, flawless and silent. The assistant gasped, struggling to sit up. Behind her, the new mirror's surface shimmered, and I saw not her reflection, but mine, pale, hollow-eyed, smiling with relief. My reflection raised its hand, beckoning me closer, and in its dark eyes was the promise, "Your turn next." I scrambled to my feet, shielding the woman's fragile body with my arm. "Go," I whispered. "Just go." She nodded, expression frightened. I helped her to the door, praying she would leave this place forever. As I guided her past the threshold, the air turned thick and cold. I heard her gasp, then the echo of her name whispered in terrible pleasure, "Eleanor." I bolted the front door behind her, flinging the bolt and throwing myself against it as if bracing for an onslaught. Silence followed. Then footsteps. Soft, deliberate on the other side of the wood. I held my breath. The doorknob rattled once, twice, then stilled. I sank to the floor, sliding down until my back hit the door. My heart pounded so fiercely I thought I would burst. I waited until dawn. Then, hands shaking, I crept back to the parlor. The mirror glinted in the early light, perfectly intact. No cracks, no sign of the struggle. On the floor lay the assistant's nightgown, stained and torn, but nothing else. I knelt and pressed my palm to the glass. My reflection stared back, calm, as if mocking me. There was no depth to the surface, no whisper of liquid darkness. It was just glass, untouched, unmarked. And yet I knew it wasn't over. Because somewhere inside that flawless mirror, a piece of me had remained behind, trapped, fractured, destined to become her. I tasted bitterness on my tongue, anger at my own weakness. I had freed her, but at what cost? I left the townhouse that morning and never returned. I donated the antiques, sold the carpets, emptied the attic. I wanted every memory of that place erased. But in hotel rooms and borrowed apartments, I feel its pull. Whenever I wash my hands, blood from a kitchen mishap, a scratch from unloading groceries, I catch a glimpse of movement behind glass. A pair of sorrowful eyes. Maybe it's just a trick of light. Maybe it's my own guilt mirrored back at me. Last night, I dreamed of Eleanor again, standing behind me in a hallway of mirrors, her mouth opening, releasing a howl that filled my chest. I woke gasping, heart pounding, aware of a warm weight at the foot of my bed. My sheets were damp. I flipped on the light, nothing there. Then I caught sight of the bathroom mirror. In it, I saw her, my face, pale and hollow, lips curved in a sad, welcoming smile. I didn't dare move. I watched until the mirror rippled, and she leaned forward, her voice slipping through the glass. "Join me." I closed my eyes, and I heard the click of the door of every mirror in the building unlocking, just for me. I never believed something could live behind these walls until I heard it call my name in the dark. Every night, after the world outside had slipped beneath its shallow moonlit sleep, I lay awake in my bedroom, straining to will my eyelids to close. It began as a soft scuttling, like insects feeding on rot. I told myself it was mice, always mice. I pictured them darting through voids between plaster and lath, their tiny teeth gnawing at the building's aging bones. But no matter how many traps I set, no bodies ever turned up. No chewed bodies, no lifeless forms to confirm my suspicions. Only silence until the scratching resumed. The first time I woke to a whisper, I froze mid-breath, convinced I'd slipped across the border into another realm. A faint voice, so soft I almost doubted my own ears, murmured, "Can you hear me?" It was impossible to tell where it came from, left wall, right wall, ceiling, closet. The darkness swallowed direction. My heart thundered so loudly I thought the entire house must tremble. When I dared to speak, my own voice sounded alien. "Who's there?" I croaked. No answer. Just the scratch, 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 like claws dragging across wood. Night after night, the sounds grew bolder. The first few nights, I blamed fatigue. The next week, I moved my reading lamp closer, thinking the beam would banish phantom noises. Instead, each glow of light seemed to embolden them. Scratches became taps, taps became thumps, thumps became heavy breathing, low rasping that echoed inside my skull. I started wearing earplugs, piled pillows over my head, pressed my palms so hard to my ears I thought I'd crush myself. Still, I heard it, a wet, deliberate rasp that slithered inside my mind. Driven half mad by exhaustion, I bought a drill. Even in my haze, I reasoned, if I bored holes through the plaster, I'd either glimpse a nest of rodents or prove to myself there was nothing supernatural here. Late one night, I shoved the drill's bit against the wallpapered wall beside my bed and pressed the trigger. The drill groaned to life, spinning as I pushed forward. Suddenly, a stifled gasp echoed through the bit, rattling the tool in my hands. It sounded absurd, like breathing into a straw. I jerked back, yanked the drill free, and the wall fell silent except for my own ragged breathing. By morning, I found my hands shaking. I couldn't tell whether I'd hurt an animal or a monster. Colleagues at the office noticed dark circles under my eyes. I smiled wanly and blamed insomnia. But I started to dread dusk the way one dreads a train wreck about to happen. After dinner, I lay in bed, feigning sleep even as I awaited the first sign. And always, within an hour of the streetlights flickering on, I heard it begin. I tried reasoning with it, speaking softly into the plaster. "What do you want?" I whispered through the wall. I imagined my voice pushing through plaster, wood, and lath, reaching a small hidden chamber. For weeks, there was no reply. Then, one night, a single word floated back, home, home. My skin prickled. The house I'd moved into less than a year ago was hardly home. I rented, after all, an old Victorian remodeled into apartments. I'd never met the other tenants, and the landlord lived 3 states away. Yet that night, I sat bolt upright, heart hammering, as if I'd awoken in my childhood bedroom. "I'm not your home," I whispered fiercely. "This is just an apartment." "Silence!" I cursed myself for speaking aloud. The neighbors would question me. I needed proof. I decided, in some perverse sense, to catch it. I set up a digital voice recorder on a nightstand pointed at the wall. I wrapped it in a scarf to muffle any click of buttons. When the scratching began, I hit record. The next morning, I crept in to retrieve the device, certain I'd captured something. Instead, the recorder was gone. No sign of it on the floor, no battery compartment opened or batteries missing, just gone. I searched the room in a panic, convinced it had dragged the recorder into the wall. After an hour, I found it tucked behind a book in my old leather armchair, screen cracked and smeared with something dark I refused to examine. Sleep was impossible after that. I began keeping a notebook on my bedside table. Every sound, every whisper, every thump I jotted down with trembling hands, along with timestamps. Yet tomorrow morning, whenever I glanced at the page, the times were smudged, the ink blurred, as though wet, and the writing illegible. I accused myself of dreaming it, ink bleeding in my sleep. I vowed to switch to pencil, but pencils shattered, snapped in two, or vanished entirely. On the 7th night, I sat cross-legged on the floor, flashlight in one hand, my father's old hunting knife in the other. I ripped at a corner of wallpaper, tearing carefully so I could replace it later, revealing a patch of bare plaster. I waited, willing the darkness to breathe. And then I heard it. A scratching, soft at first, then jolting, frantic. I pressed my ear to the plaster, the flashlight's trembling beam illuminating dust motes. The breath that exhaled against my ear was cold, oily, as if something had crawled out of my nightmares. "Help me," it rasped. I slammed my hand over my mouth, yanked back the knife. My grip tightened until the handle bit into my palm. I glanced around the room, the door, the closet, the ceiling fan, anywhere something could have moved. But I was alone. The knife fell, clattering to the floor, and the voice ended with a single, pained sob. I should have run then. Anything to escape those walls. But something held me there. Pity, curiosity, madness, perhaps all three. I tried to piece together a narrative. Whoever, or whatever, lived here had been trapped, maybe for decades, perhaps since the house was built. The wallpaper's pattern was old, curling at the edges. It hinted at layers beneath layers, painted over countless times. I thought of the house history, rumors of a child who disappeared in the 1920s, of secret passages and hidden rooms left behind by drunken servants. It seemed too perfect. I started tearing at more wallpaper, section by section, until I uncovered a faint outline of a door drawn in cramped scratches. It was small, barely a foot tall, etched into the plaster. Beneath it, someone had scratched a date, 10th October 2030. Over it, one name, Evelyn. My chest tightened. I remembered reading about a young girl named Evelyn who vanished in 1930, her parents blaming her flighty imagination when she spoke of another family living inside the walls. They claimed she wandered away, never to return. Her case went cold. The house eventually sold, repainted, renovated, but the house stayed. She never came home. My breath caught. I ran to my laptop and searched Evelyn Wall's 1930 disappearance. The first result was a forum post from a local history enthusiast. He wrote that the house had a hidden dollhouse replica built for Evelyn by her father, down to the smallest detail. When Evelyn stopped speaking, he died of heartbreak. No one ever found the dollhouse. Some believed Evelyn, an only child, wandered into a secret passage and was never rescued. The house stood abandoned for years after. I stared at the photo in the post, a peeling wallpaper that matched mine exactly. I sank to the floor, mind racing. It couldn't be coincidence. The scratching continued outside my apartment too, in the bedrooms of other tenants, always dismissed as plumbing or settling pipes. None of them reported whispers or voices though. Why had it chosen me? I felt a pang of guilt. How many nights had Evelyn waited for someone to find her door? For someone to let her out? My insomnia transformed into dread. I barely ate. I haunted the edges of wakefulness, eyes fixed on the walls. When morning came, I washed out my mouth and told my reflection to hold up until tomorrow. My reflection didn't answer. On the 10th night, there was thunder and rain battered the windows. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the storm. For the first time, the voices beneath the plaster paused, as though the presence behind them was watching, waiting. Then came a hard knock, 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 swift and regular, as if someone rapping from the other side. It grew faster, tap, 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 until it turned into a furious pound. My entire body twitched with each impact. I sat up. The lamp flickered. I grabbed my father's knife and approached the wall where Evelyn's door had once been sketched. My hands trembled so badly I nearly dropped the knife. I pressed my palm against the damp plaster. The pounding ceased. In the silence, I thought I heard a sob that shook the floorboards. "Evelyn?" I whispered. "I'm here." The wall temperature shifted. Where my hand pressed, the plaster felt soft like damp clay. My fingers sank into it. I gasped and withdrew it. Smears of pale plasticine clung to my skin. I looked closer. The plaster was breathing, pulsing, as if alive. The ridges of Evelyn's door reappeared, freshly carved, deeper than before, and below it was not one date, but two. 10th October 2030, and tonight's date, tonight, the 10th anniversary of my moving in. In 5 years, on this same date, she would open the door herself. My heart hammered. I stumbled backwards, slashed at the air with the knife, as if threatening a phantom. The plaster smoothed out behind my back, erasing the door. But I heard it, a gentle click, like a lock unlatching. And then, just beyond the wall, something moved. I could almost see the hinge turning. My breath left me in a ragged gasp. I bolted for the window, flung it open, and lunged onto the fire escape. Rain sluiced down my hair. I stared back at the apartment window, revulsion knotting my stomach. Whatever was behind those walls, whatever was Evelyn, would be waiting for me when I returned. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed on the fire escape until dawn, cold and soaked. I could still hear the soft scratching from within my own skull, an echo of the voice that called my name. When the building manager finally found me at sunrise, I barely heard his questions. I handed him my keys and left without looking back. 2 days have passed since I moved into a new place. It's smaller, newer construction, drywall, metal studs, no lath or plaster, or so I thought. I taped the seams and painted over every wall by daylight. No more peeling wallpaper, no more hidden doors. The echoes of Evelyn's voice still haunt me in the quiet hours before sleep. I'm terrified that tonight, when the clock strikes midnight, I'll hear that same click from behind a wall that should be solid. I'm terrified she'll come back and find there's no place for her anymore. But sometimes, in the silence, I swear I feel nails scratching at the back of my head, as though Evelyn is right behind me, desperate to be seen, desperate to go home. And I have nowhere left to run. I never imagined an alarm could be more terrifying than the silence it shattered. When I first moved into the little brick bungalow at the edge of town, I was charmed by its quaint porch swing and neatly trimmed hedges. Inside, the walls were a pale cream, warm under the sunlit afternoons. I unpacked my life in boxes and hung family photos on the plaster, breathing relief that I'd finally escaped the cramped apartment that had nearly driven me mad. I downloaded a sleep tracker app, setting my phone alarm for 6:30 a.m. each morning. Then I went to bed, confident that at worst I'd wake groggy, hit snooze once or twice, and stumble into the workday. On the third night, something woke me at exactly midnight. My phone vibrated against the nightstand, buzzing like a swarm of flies. I flung an arm out to slap it silent, but when I saw the screen light up with the alarm icon, I froze. The app displayed no scheduled alarm at that hour. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and the screen dimmed to black. Silence reclaimed the room. I sat up, heart hammering, scanning the dark corners. I told myself it was a glitch, a stray notification. I sighed, fell back against the pillow, then I heard it. From beneath the bed came a tiny voice, so soft I thought I'd imagined it. "Your time starts now." My skin went cold. I flipped on the bedside lamp, the low glow revealing nothing but my unworn slippers and the dusty crate I'd unpacked earlier and shoved under the frame. The voice dripped from the darkness like syrup. I knelt beside the bed, peered under it, but only the crate, its rough wood grain etched with fading letters I couldn't read in the lamplight. I set the lamp on the floor and reached for the crate handle. My fingers touched cold metal hinges. Whatever was speaking was trapped inside. The next night, I half expected nothing. I lay in bed, half-heartedly setting my phone alarm for midnight just in case. At exactly 12 hours 0 minutes 0 seconds, the app vibrated again, but this time the screen showed no alarm dialed within the next 24 hours. My breath caught. The old-fashioned alarm clock taped to the bottom of the crate ticked up beside me. Its two black hands quivered, then snapped upright at 12. Its bells chimed once, but the sound was hollow, echoing from the crate as though the clock itself were inside. Then the ticking began in my skull, pulsing in time with the clock's backward spin. I ripped the clock free from the crate. Its face was smeared with dust, and the back panel rattled with something loose inside. The hands spun backward, the numbers contorting. I shook it. The ticking slowed, then halted as if frozen. For a moment I heard nothing but my panicked breathing. Then, from the crate, the latch clicked. My entire body froze. I stared at the crate's lid, expecting it to burst open, but it remained shut. The clock's hands jerked back to 12, and the bells chimed twice. "Your time starts now," the voice whispered again, this time so close I felt warm breath on my ankle. I ran to the living room and threw the crate onto the couch. I pressed my ear to the wood. A rasping breath hissed against my skin, and the crate vibrated as if struggling from the inside. My heart felt lodged in my throat. I jabbed at the crate with a screwdriver, pried at the seams, but the wood held fast. Whatever was inside was strong. I backed away until I hit the hall wall, sliding down until I sat on the floor, trembling. I listened as the clock's chime faded into the darkness, and the house fell silent once more. Daylight offered no relief. I stuck a post-it to the crate reading, "Do not open," and taped it shut with duct tape. I considered calling a locksmith, a handyman, anyone to remove the hinges and free whatever was trapped. But I dreaded seeing what might crawl out. I worried that if I freed it, I would be releasing something that sized me up as prey. At work, my coworkers noticed my jittery glances at windows and the way I flinched at sudden noises. I lied that I was having electrical problems. They nodded sympathetically, but never offered help. That evening, I bought a digital voice recorder and left it on the coffee table facing the crate. I set my phone alarm for midnight again. I taped the recorder's playback button, muffling its clicks, and curled up on the couch with the blanket covering my head. At midnight, my phone buzzed. The recorder's little red light blinked on its own before the crate shook violently. The recorder tumbled off the table. Papers scattered. I winced at the sound of heavy breathing resonating through the room. The recorder light blinked brighter, then dimmed. When I dared to look, it was silent and still. I pressed stop, unwrapped the tape, and played it back. Static! A high-pitched whine that made my ears ache. Then a whisper. You can't hide. It crackled and warped, then went silent. My blood ran cold. Night after night, the pattern repeated. My phone alarm buzzed at midnight. I jolt awake. The crate rattles. The clock chimes. The voice beckons. I stopped sleeping. My eyes burned, head pounding, but I dared not close them. I emptied the medicine chest of sleeping pills, popped one, hoping to dull my senses. I dreamt of tinny bell chimes and saw faces pressed to the crate's slats, pale lips, dead eyes begging to be let out. I woke each time at 11:58 p.m., heart racing, tongue cottony. On the seventh night, I decided to face it. I lined the hallway with lamps so there were no shadows. At precisely 11:50, I crouched before the crate with a crowbar, my phone in one hand, the recorder in the other. The clock under the crate ticked backward in ominous beats. I pried at the lid. The wood cracked. My knuckles whitened. I heard something shift inside. At 11 hours 59 minutes 30 seconds, I yanked the lid free and the crate exploded open. A figure lunged out, colliding with my chest so hard I flew backward. I hit the wall, wind knocked out of me. A woman lay panting on the floor. Her hair was soaked, dripping water onto the rug in little puddles that hissed like steam. Her nightgown clung to her pale skin. Her eyes were wide and panicked. She stared at me, mouth working, but no sound came. Behind her, the crate quivered on the couch, its back panel loose. The old clock perched on top spun furiously, hands at odds. I scrambled to my feet, backing away as the clock's bells rang out in rapid staccato, each chime a stab in my chest. The woman pressed a wet hand to the floorboards, pulling herself upright. She looked at me, fear giving way to pleading. I realized the voice wasn't coming from the crate now. It was coming from her own mouth. My time is up, she croaked. Her voice was an echo, metallic and distant. She staggered toward the front door. I need. She clutched her chest as if her heart had seized. She looked back at me, tears in her eyes, then turned the knob and slipped out into the night. I slammed the door shut, fumbling for the deadbolt. The last thing I heard was her whispered thank you, followed by the click of her footsteps fading away on the porch. I collapsed in the entryway, shaking. The crate lay empty behind the sofa, the clock silent at 12. I thought it over with trembling logic. How had she gotten in? How had she been trapped in wood beneath my bed? I checked the crate, no secret compartments, nothing but rough planks and nails. The recorder lay at my feet. I pressed play. A hollow voice, then her raspy whisper, "Your time starts now." Terror gripped me anew. If her time had ended at midnight, then mine began. I raced to the window, but the street was empty, bathed in yellow lamplight. I tried to call the police, but my phone wouldn't dial out. It buzzed and clicked, then showed no service. I pounded the handset against my palm until the screen cracked, then threw it aside. Sleep was impossible. I moved the crate to the dining room and taped black plastic backs over every window and door. I set chairs and tables in front of them, creating a barricade. I double-checked the locks on the front and back. Then I waited. At 11:45 p.m., I sat in the dark dining room, knees drawn to my chest. I could hear the muffled tick-tock of the clock somewhere, though I knew it had ceased. The house seemed to hold its breath. At 11:58, I felt a breeze brush my cheek, even though every opening was covered. It carried the faintest scent of rain and something metallic, like blood. My ear pressed to the wall. I heard whispers in languages I didn't know, layered and overlapping, rising into a chant. The clock resumed, deep within the walls. Ding, ding, ding. My blood froze. My foot tapped in time. Then the chant crescendoed, followed by a terrible silence. At exactly midnight, a single chime rang out from the wall behind me, so clear I felt it in my spine. Then the door I'd locked from the inside began to rattle shake as though pounded from the other side. The plastic tore. Chairs toppled. The hinges creaked. I bolted from the barricade toward the back door, but the front began to open. Wide-eyed, I ran into the hall where the crate had been, now empty and lifeless. The woman. No, the thing that had worn her skin. Her body lay collapsed on the floorboards in glistening beads of what looked like water and oil. It seemed to dissolve, a pale shape spreading into the wood. The spot where she'd fallen rippled like a disturbed pond. Each chime echoed through my skull, one after another, faster and faster. I heard her voice in my ear, whispered so close I felt warm breath against my neck. Your time. The front door swung open, and a figure stepped through the threshold. My limbs froze. In the dim lamp glow, I recognized the woman, but her face was too long, her limbs too angular. Water dripped from her hair, pooling at her feet. Her eyes were black windows, empty. She smiled, a slow, wet curl of lips. Then she tilted her head and spoke in that rasping whisper. It's time. I screamed, lunged for the back door, and yanked it open. Rain poured in. Lightning flashed across the sky. I didn't stop to notice the thunder or the downpour. I ran onto the lawn, barefoot, dripping, heart pounding like the final toll of a bell. Behind me, the house windows lit up with that backward ticking, hundreds of tiny clocks turning fast, chimes ringing in unison. I didn't look back again. When I reached the road, I flagged a passing car with shaking arms. The driver threw the door open, and I tumbled inside, coughing and sobbing. I pointed back, but the downpour obliterated everything. When I caught my breath, I asked him to drive to anywhere but there. I never went back for my things. The bungalow stands empty now, its windows dark, its clock hands frozen at midnight. Sometimes I see it on my nightly drives home, its porch light flickering like a warning. I've moved 3 times since then, but I still wake at exactly 12, my phone vibrating with an alarm I didn't set. And late at night, when the rain falls hard, I swear I hear the faintest chime echoing through my bones, and a whisper in my ear that says, your time starts now. I'd planned a short solo trip into the backcountry, a chance to escape the relentless pulse of modern life and lose myself in the quiet austerity of nature. I was drawn, however, not just by the call of solitude, but by a peculiar rumor I'd heard whispered in local bars, of a forgotten cabin hidden deep within these woods, a relic of a past that had long been buried by time. No map marked its location, and locals claimed its existence was an urban legend. But legends, as I soon learned, often have kernels of disturbing truth. I set out on a crisp autumn morning, backpack loaded with a few essentials and a meticulously drawn route that I had planned from approximate coordinates. The forest welcomed me with a muted symphony of rustling leaves and distant bird calls. The deeper I ventured, the more I felt the pervasive solitude transform into a heavy, expectant quiet, as if the woods were holding their breath in anticipation. About 6 hours into my hike, fatigue mingled with an inexplicable sense of urgency. I found myself wandering off the beaten path, drawn by a faint glimmer of sunlight that filtered through a peculiar gap in the dense canopy. There, almost hidden by overgrown ferns and tangled vines, stood a narrow clearing. In the center, half swallowed by creeping ivy and shadows, was a dilapidated cabin that looked as though it had been abandoned for decades. I stopped dead in my tracks. My heart hammered as I approached the weathered structure. The cabin was constructed of dark, splintered logs, its once proud architecture now reduced to uneven walls and sagging roofs. Its windows, shattered and crusted with grime, seemed like the hollow eyes of a long-dead sentinel. The very sight of it sent a chill coursing through my veins. The path to the cabin was uneven and obscured by fallen branches. I hesitated at the threshold, an uneasy mix of dread and curiosity pulling me forward. As I stepped into the clearing, a metallic tang filled the air, a scent of decay and rust that seemed out of place in the otherwise crisp, invigorating forest. The overgrown grass reached up to my boots as if to warn me not to tread further, yet my determination and morbid fascination forced my feet onward. Inside, the cabin's interior was shrouded in gloom, lit only by stray beams of light that pierced through holes in the rotted roof. Dust motes danced in the slivers of sunlight, lending a surreal quality to the scene. The floorboards creaked underfoot, and every step I took sounded like a whisper of long-forgotten secrets. As I explored further, I discovered that the cabin comprised only a few small rooms, a living area with a collapsed fireplace, a narrow kitchen nook with a rusted sink, and a single bedroom. On a rickety table in the living area lay several objects that immediately attracted my attention. Among them was a half-burned photograph in an ornate frame. The faded image captured a family, a father, a mother, and 2 children, all wearing somber expressions as though they were guarding a secret. Their eyes, even in the decay of the photograph, seemed to plead for help. Next to it, I found a leather-bound journal, its cover cracked and stained with what looked like old blood. The pages within were filled with frantic, nearly illegible script, interspersed with sketches of symbols I didn't recognize. I could feel my pulse quickening. There was an undeniable, almost palpable energy in this cabin, a residual imprint of lives lived in terror, sorrow, and perhaps even something darker. As I leafed through the journal, I discovered entries that detailed the life of a man who had once lived in seclusion in these woods. His words were desperate and erratic. He wrote of nightly visits by mysterious figures, of voices that whispered his name from the darkness, and of sinister rituals performed under the cold light of the moon. One entry mentioned a covenant of blood sealed within these very walls, a secret too dangerous to be left unsaid. The deeper I delved into the journal, the more my rational mind began to unravel. The narrative revealed that the cabin was once a meeting point for individuals who had forsaken society to worship something ancient and unspeakable. They believed that by forging a pact with this entity, they could gain immortality or an escape from the torments of mortal life. But something had gone horribly wrong. The accounts were filled with despair, betrayal, and the chilling realization that the entity they'd courted was not a benevolent savior, but a merciless force that demanded blood and souls in return. Late that afternoon, as the sun began its slow descent, I realized I'd lost track of time. The shadows grew longer, and an oppressive darkness started to seep into every corner of the clearing. I made a mental note to document every detail, every emotion that surged within me, feeling increasingly that I was stepping into someone else's nightmare, a nightmare that might not let go so easily. I decided to set up camp near the cabin. I was both repulsed and compelled by this place, repulsed by the weight of its tragic past and compelled by a need to understand it. In the relative safety of a clearing, I built a small fire, its flickering glow dancing against the backdrop of ancient trees. The fire provided a semblance of warmth, but the night air was filled with an unholy chill that seemed to seep through my very soul. Almost immediately, I began to notice things that defied natural explanation. At first, it was subtle, a scratching sound coming from the walls of the cabin that I couldn't attribute to any animal I knew of, a soft rustling that seemed too deliberate to be the wind. Then came the whispers. Faint, murmured voices, as though echoing from the depths of the forest. They seemed to speak in broken sentences, half-formed pleas and warnings that I could barely decipher. I sat rigid, straining to understand their message, my hand trembling as I clutched the journal. I tried to dismiss it as my imagination. After all, I'd spent hours alone in a decrepit cabin, and the isolation was bound to play tricks on my mind. But as the night deepened, the voices grew louder and seemed to come from everywhere at once. They called out names, some familiar, others utterly alien, and they spoke of darkness and the inevitability of fate. I felt as if the cabin itself were alive, its every creak and groan a lament for the terrible deeds committed within its walls. Around midnight, I couldn't take it anymore. An inexplicable dread urged me to return to my tent, away from the oppressive presence of the cabin. But as I turned to leave, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye, a figure standing at the far end of the room, barely discernible in the gloom. It looked like a person, yet its features were blurred and shifting, as though it were a mirage conjured up by my mind. I froze, my throat tight with a scream that I could not let out. The figure began to move slowly, almost gliding towards me. Every instinct screamed for me to run, but my body was paralyzed by a mix of terror and disbelief. As it drew nearer, I could see that its eyes held a strange intensity, an ancient sorrow and resignation that seemed to pierce right through me. I couldn't tell if it was reaching out in an act of warning or if it was merely a specter of the past, doomed to wander these halls forever. I tried to speak, but only a choked whisper came out. "Who? Are you?" The figure halted a few feet away, as if deliberating whether my question was worth an answer. For what seemed like an eternity, we simply stared at each other in a silence that was more deafening than any scream could have been. Then, as silently as it had appeared, the figure dissipated into thin air, leaving behind a palpable void, a lingering presence that made my skin crawl. I spent the rest of that night huddled by the fire, listening to the murmurs of the unseen, my thoughts racing as I recalled the diary entries and the haunting images in the photograph. In the morning, I decided to investigate further. Something inside me demanded answers, even if it meant confronting the darkness head-on. Returning to the cabin, I meticulously searched every nook and cranny. In a hidden compartment beneath a loose floorboard in the living area, I discovered a small, rusted key. It was engraved with odd symbols that matched those in the journal, and it felt unnervingly warm to the touch, almost as if it had been waiting for me. My pulse accelerated as I realized this key might unlock something critical, a mystery that had long been locked away in time. With trembling hands, I made my way to a narrow door concealed behind a torn curtain in the bedroom. The door creaked open to reveal a small, cramped room that seemed frozen in a different era. The walls were lined with faded photographs, newspaper clippings, and handwritten letters. In the center of the room sat a wooden desk with an ornate mirror. As I gazed into the mirror, I didn't just see my own reflection. I saw fleeting images, faces of people long gone, their expressions etched with horror and longing. For a brief moment, I felt a surge of profound empathy, as though those souls were trapped in a never-ending cycle of suffering, desperate for release. I carefully lifted one of the letters and began to read. It detailed the tragic history of the cabin's inhabitants, a family shattered by grief when one member had gone missing under mysterious circumstances. The missing person was rumored to have been ensnared by the cult that once occupied the cabin, their fate sealed by a horrific pact. According to the letter, the family believed that if the wrong person were to find the cabin and disturb its sanctity, the vengeful spirit of the missing person would claim them as retribution. I shivered as I pieced together each detail. The intensity of my emotions was overwhelming. The air in that secret room felt charged, as though the very walls harbored the sorrow and rage of those lost souls. My mind reeled with questions. Was I merely an accidental intruder, or had fate guided me here to relive the final, horrifying chapter of a tormented family's legacy? As dusk began to fall, I felt an almost magnetic pull towards the mirror again. I could no longer ignore the sense of foreboding that clung to every inch of the cabin. The whispers had ceased for a while, and eerie silence settled in their place, broken only by the occasional creak of the settling wood. In the gathering gloom, I decided it was time to leave. The forest beyond the clearing no longer offered solace. It now seemed to be a labyrinth of haunted recollections that might claim me as their next victim. I gathered the journal, the key, and the few letters I could salvage, carefully tucking them into my backpack as tangible pieces of a mystery that was bigger than I had ever imagined. Every step I took back towards the clearing was accompanied by an oppressive sense of being watched. not only by the eyes of ancient trees, but by something far more malevolent lurking in the shadows. Outside, the woods had transformed into a realm of nightmares. The interplay of moonlight and darkness rendered every shape sinister. I stumbled through the underbrush with my heart pounding, each distant rustle or cracking twig sending shockwaves of terror through my mind. It wasn't long before I realized that I wasn't alone on this path. Footsteps echoed mine, sometimes matching my pace, sometimes trailing just behind. I quickened my speed, the forest suddenly full of unseen predators. In a desperate bid for escape, I veered off the narrow trail and plunged into a tangled mass of trees and brambles. The oppressive darkness seemed to close in on me, and somewhere in the distance, I could hear a low, guttural sound, a sound that could only belong to something not entirely human. Every instinct urged me to run faster, my legs moving on their own as I tried to outrun the looming nightmare. After what felt like an eternity of frantic running, I burst into a small clearing. There, the forest opened up, revealing a moonlit pond with glassy, undisturbed water. For a fleeting moment, I felt a hint of relief. I crouched near the water's edge, panting and glancing around nervously, convinced that any movement in the dark woods would signal the approach of my pursuer. The silence of the pond was eerily perfect, until I noticed my own reflection ripple and blur as if something had disturbed it from behind. Slowly, I turned, and there in the gloom stood a gaunt figure draped in tattered clothing. Its eyes glowed faintly under the moon's pale light, and its elongated fingers pointed directly at me. I dared not speak, terrified that any sound would shatter the fragile tranquility and bring upon me a fate beyond imagining. The figure advanced slowly, each step deliberate and heavy with a sense of inevitability. In that agonizing moment, memories of the diary entries and the heartfelt letters came flooding back. I understood that I was not simply witnessing the tragedies of the past. I was part of an unbroken chain linking the lost souls of the cabin to the present. The figure, whether spirit or something else entirely, was a guardian of secrets too terrible to be forgotten. It reached out with a trembling hand, as if inviting me to uncover the truth hidden in the darkness. I felt a strange compulsion that overrode my natural instinct to flee, a need to understand what had been set in motion long ago. My body slowed, and I met the figure's gaze. In the reflection of its eyes, I saw a lifetime of grief, betrayal, and a desperate hope for redemption. Then, as silently as it had appeared, the spectral figure faded into the night. I was left alone by the pond, shaken to my core and grappling with the realization that the boundary between the living and the dead was thinner here than anywhere else. Clambering to my feet, I resolved that I could not abandon the truth that the cabin and its haunted past demanded to be understood. The trek back through the forest was a trial of endurance and willpower. Every snap of twig underfoot was a reminder of unseen eyes tracking my progress. When I finally emerged from the oppressive darkness of the woods and back onto a faint, nearly forgotten logging road, the break of dawn was my only solace. In the days that followed, I pored over the journal and the salvaged letters, trying to piece together the tragic timeline of the cabin's occupants. I learned that the missing member of that family had been involved with a secretive sect that believed in transcending mortal existence through forbidden rituals. Their hopes had twisted into madness, and when the ritual went awry, it did not end with death, but with a curse, a lingering presence bound to the site and to anyone who dared disturb its slumber. I contacted local historians and delved into archived records, finding whispers of these events in dusty county documents and town folklore. The deeper I dug, the more it became evident that what I had experienced was not an isolated incident, but a thread woven into a fabric of recurring tragedies spanning generations. Every night since my escape, I have dreamed of that cabin. I see myself wandering its gloomy corridors, hearing the soft whispers of voices that beg for release, and witnessing spectral figures silently reenact the horrors of that forgotten past. I can't shake the feeling that I am now linked to the fate of that place. I have become a reluctant guardian of its secrets, burdened with the knowledge that some mysteries are perhaps best left undisturbed. Every new day is colored by a lingering dread and an almost inevitable pull back to that clearing in the woods. Even now, as I sit before my computer recounting these events, I can still smell the metallic tang of decay, see the brittle image of the family's pleading eyes, and feel the oppressive weight of the cabin's sorrow. I have returned to civilization physically, yet a part of me remains forever in those dark woods. The memory of that spectral figure at the pond is a permanent scar on my psyche, a reminder that some places and some secrets can never truly be left behind. I live with the constant question, was I merely an unwitting trespasser, or did fate lead me to that cabin to resolve something unfinished? Perhaps one day I will return, not as a frightened wanderer, but as a seeker of truth willing to confront the darkness at its source. Until that time, I carry with me the echo of that night, a chilling symphony of sorrow and despair that haunts my every waking moment. The cabin in the clearing remains an enigma, a silent testament to horrors past and a constant reminder that in the depths of the woods, some secrets do not want to be discovered. I now know that some horrors are not confined to the pages of forgotten diaries or the whispered legends of old-timers. They lurk in the dark recesses of time and space, waiting patiently for someone to stir them awake. And as the nights grow longer and the shadows creep in earlier with each passing autumn, I can't help but wonder if I am being watched still. If the forest ever truly lets go of its captive souls, or if I am destined to walk alongside them for the rest of my days. For now, I have survived that terrible night, but the whispers continue in my dreams, and the spectral face at the pond lingers in my mind. The memory of that cursed cabin, its forgotten legacy of despair, and the unyielding pull of its dark mystery will remain with me, a permanent part of who I am, until the day I finally face it again. If you ever find yourself driving alone at night, maybe after a night drinking with friends, getting off work late, or pushing yourself to reach a distant destination, refusing to stop for rest, and suddenly you're on a road that doesn't appear on your GPS or map, unsure how you even got there, you may have unknowingly been selected by 7 Turns Road. Take a deep breath and follow this guide exactly. I've traveled this road myself many times. There is no turning back, no stopping, only forward. First off, you need to understand something. You were chosen, and I have no idea why. There are no rituals, no secret incantations, or hidden routes to memorize. Believe me, I've looked for patterns, I've tried to outsmart it, and I've failed every time. The truth is simple and unsettling. You'll never find 7 Turns Road intentionally. It finds you. At first, it's subtle. After making just one turn, your original route blends seamlessly into an endless stretch that feels both familiar and surreal. It doesn't matter where you were originally heading. You'll know with absolute certainty you're truly on 7 Turns Road when the temperature abruptly plummets and roadside signs blur, warp, or become nonsensical, dreamlike symbols, distorted letters, upside-down markers. You'll feel it deep in your gut. Don't fixate on the signs. That's how it tricks you into losing control. You can slow down, even stop briefly. Hell, if panic sets in hard enough, you can step outside for a breath, but never, ever make it a habit. Those who get comfortable leaving their vehicle don't tend to survive. Read carefully, memorize these steps, and accept the reality you've entered. The only path out is straight ahead. Continue along the road. Wherever you started will feel somewhat familiar, yet increasingly distant. Eventually, this stretch will lead you to a second turn. Your car's radio will switch on automatically. Attempts to turn it off or adjust the volume will fail. At first, you'll hear a faint white noise that gradually evolves into a woman's soft muttering, indecipherable gibberish that slowly transforms into coherent words, spilling out your darkest secrets, hidden truths you've told no one. I was terrified the first few times, but keep your eyes glued to the road. Your headlights are your only illumination, and you cannot afford to crash. Ignore the woman and drive until the next turn appears. By the third turn, any lingering familiarity of your surroundings will vanish entirely. A dense, oppressive forest will surge upwards, its thick, tangled branches arching overhead to form an almost suffocating canopy, enclosing you completely. On either side of the road, animals will appear, standing impossibly still, a fox, a squirrel, a bear, a bird, all fixed like grotesque statues. Their empty, hollow eyes will lock onto your every movement, heads slowly pivoting in unnatural synchronization as your vehicle passes. Keep driving. Do not acknowledge them. They aren't animals, not anymore. They're mere husks, puppeteered by the road itself as silent watchers. If curiosity compels you to glance again, and trust me, you shouldn't, you'll notice those husks beginning to distort, melting as if made from wax beneath a relentless flame. First sloughs away in thick, wet clumps, revealing slick, gleaming surfaces beneath, like dark, chitinous exoskeletons. Eyes liquefy, dribbling slowly from their sockets in streams of viscous decay. The forest around you fills with the sickly sound of dripping, the quiet cracks and pops of joints shifting beneath unraveling skin. Eyes forward. Keep your foot steady on the gas. Pretend you don't see them, because I assure you, they see you. At the fourth turn, your fuel gauge will begin to plummet alarmingly fast. Your headlights will flicker intermittently. Remain calm. The road is enticing you to exit your vehicle. Do not. You're safe if you remain inside. Your speedometer will become erratic, but maintain a steady, comfortable speed. The radio's whispering will grow louder, clearer. The woman's voice will narrate every tiny detail of your existence, each blink, heartbeat, every breath you take, even the sweat dripping down your back onto your seat. Pay her no mind. Your focus must remain solely on the road until the next turn. On the fifth turn, a gentle snowfall begins, serene at first, softly coating your car. Normally, it might be calming, but the snow quickly intensifies. You'll notice your hearing fading alongside the thickening snowfall. The harsh wind buffeting your vehicle will abruptly stop. Your engine sounds will disappear, followed by your own panicked breathing. All you'll have left is a faint ringing in your ears. Visibility deteriorates until your headlights barely illuminate the blizzard. This snow goes on endlessly, miles upon miles. Do not look to the sides. Those silent, shadowy silhouettes will crawl toward your slowly moving car, attempting to pry their way inside or distract you into veering off the path. If you panic and leave the road, there's no returning. Some shadows will dash suddenly in front of your car. My advice? Pretend they're not there and keep driving. Eventually, you'll encounter a sign, ever-changing, surreal, similar to those at the first turn. Each glance away alters its appearance, but it signals your sixth turn. Right after passing this shifting sign, turn right immediately. Do not miss it. On the sixth turn, your hearing will gradually return. The relentless snowstorm, which seemed eternal, will abruptly cease, melting away rapidly and leaving you alone on the road. The road itself will deteriorate, becoming rough and worn before shifting into gravel. Your car will shake violently, rattling over every pebble and rock. Soon, these sounds will grow louder, heavier, disturbingly similar to the snapping and breaking of bones beneath your tires. An open field will suddenly stretch out around you, filled with hundreds, perhaps thousands of tall, dark figures. Initially, you might mistake them for dead, leafless trees, but they will begin to slowly, unsteadily move toward your vehicle. The smallest of these entities tower nearly 10 feet, while the largest stretch close to 20. Their elongated forms resemble charred bone fused with twisted bark. They possess smooth, featureless faces and deep, hollow mouths emitting anguished voices, cries, screams, and pleas of those you've loved, lost, or failed. You'll feel an overwhelming urge to stop and help them. Resist it. Accelerate as quickly as possible. The sound of cracking bones beneath your wheels, combined with their sorrowful cries, will make this turn one of the worst you've encountered. While slow, they will inch closer. Speed past them. As you approach the final turn, a profound sense of relief and accomplishment will flood through you. You'll feel as if you've narrowly escaped digestion by something monstrous and spat back out into safety. This turn will be deceptively beautiful, almost rewarding, adorned with climbing roses and vibrant flowers. Euphoria will briefly fill you until your headlights begin to flicker, your dashboard lights flash erratically, and every warning signal activates simultaneously. Your vehicle will abruptly die, coasting to a complete stop. With one final flicker of your headlights, utter darkness, deeper than any you've known, will consume you. This is the final test. The road will determine your fate. Remain inside, silent and still. You'll soon hear tapping and knocking against windows, doors, even beneath your car. Countless entities will circle and inspect your vehicle, breathing heavily and scratching at the exterior. Hold tightly to your steering wheel. Do not brake or attempt to restart your car. Your car will begin shifting as they're pushing it towards something immense. You'll hear shuffling footsteps rapidly retreat, fearful. Then, something massive will open wide. Though invisible in the darkness, you'll sense its enormity. Your car will shift downward, your stomach plummeting as adrenaline floods your veins. A sudden drop will follow. Your vehicle will slowly descend into something terrible, crushing and grinding around you. You'll hear the car being chewed apart, the metal shredding. Sharp edges will puncture through the floor, roof, and sides. Something will scrape your flesh. The vehicle will compress tighter, the roof pressing inches from your face, the sound of destruction deafening. Then, with a final, sickening spin, you'll plummet, spiraling until consciousness fades. You'll awaken gasping on a quiet roadside, the exact place 7 Turns Road first claimed you. Feel the grass, the dirt beneath your fingers. Breathe deeply. You've survived, for now. But surviving once doesn't mean freedom forever. I've traveled this road more times than sanity should allow, and each escape comes at a heavier price. Keep this guide safe, because the road won't forget you. Even as I finish typing this from the supposed safety of my driveway, I look up, and where my house should be stands an endless road stretching onward, signs distorted and beckoning. 7 Turns Road calls me again. I had always felt a comfortable solitude in my old family home, a place full of memories, creaking floorboards, and the subtle hush of age. That late autumn evening, as I sat alone in the living room with only the soft glow of a single lamp to break the darkness, I began to wonder if the quiet was perhaps a little too quiet. The wind outside rattled against the window panes and rain drummed on the roof, but there was something else, a series of faint, deliberate thumps echoing from above. At first, I assumed it was merely the settling of an old house against a chill night. I had spent the afternoon cleaning and organizing, and maybe the temperature drop had caused the wood to contract. But as minutes turned to hours, the thumping grew more insistent. Every so often, I would pause mid-sip of my lukewarm tea and strain to listen, my heart pounding in my ears. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was out there, watching. I remembered childhood warnings about the attic. My mother once told me, with a half smile that was meant to gently tease, "Don't ever go up there after dark, dear. Some secrets are better left forgotten." At the time, I'd laughed it off. But now, alone in this vast, creaking house, those old tales of a restless presence lurking among dust and forgotten relics began to feel all too real. I tried to distract myself by flicking through an old photo album. The images of sunlit days and smiling faces did little to quiet the rising tension. Instead, an icy dread crept over me every time I caught a sound, a soft rustling in the ceiling, a scrape as if an object were dragging along the beams. I could almost swear I heard a whisper, indistinct yet laden with a meaning I couldn't fathom. After what felt like an eternity, I stood and approached the narrow doorway that led to the attic. The door, painted a faded pale blue, hung slightly off its hinges. Its peeling paint and age-worn brass handle gave it an aura of melancholy abandonment. I hesitated at its threshold, half expecting to hear something from within, maybe a rasping voice or even the quiet sound of a sob. Instead, there was only silence. I flicked on my cell phone's flashlight and, with trembling hands, pushed open the door. A burst of stale, dust-laden air enveloped me as the old wooden stairs creaked under my weight. I climbed slowly, each step punctuated by the echo of my rising heartbeat. The atmosphere grew thicker the higher I ascended, a mix of despair, hidden grief, and a sense of foreboding that prickled at the back of my neck. At the top of the stairs, I paused at the narrow entryway. The attic revealed itself in weak, spectral light that streamed through a grimy window. Boxes, old furniture shrouded in yellowing sheets, and cobweb trinkets filled the space, each relic a silent witness to the passage of time. Yet, in the far corner of the room, I sensed movement, a dark, indistinct shape that didn't belong among the dusty antiques. I aimed the beam of my phone's light at the shape. For an instant, the darkness receded, and I saw nothing but shadows. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, it reappeared. My breath caught in my throat. There, standing in the dim haze near a battered mirror, was a figure as vague as smoke. Its form was human enough, shoulders stooped, head slightly bowed, but its eyes were the most unnerving part. Deep, hollow voids that seemed to blink in and out of existence, as if they were trying to tell me a secret. I froze on the spot, my mind racing. Was this a trick of the light? Had my imagination, fueled by too many late-night horror movies, finally gotten the better of me? The figure did not move, yet I felt as though its gaze bore into the very soul of my being. Every instinct urged me to run down the stairs, to retreat back to the safety of the living room, but a deeper, inexplicable compulsion held me there. A soft, almost imperceptible whisper floated through the stagnant air. I couldn't make out the words, but they carried a weight that pressed against my chest like a physical burden. I know you. The sound seemed to say, trailing off into a faint wail that mingled with the moan of the wind outside. It wasn't a familiar voice, and it filled me with a primal terror that I had long thought belonged only in nightmares. I wanted to call out, to demand that the presence show itself or speak clearly, but the sound died in my throat. Instead, I stood in that oppressive silence, paralyzed by the intensity of my own fear and the weight of the unknown. In that moment, every creak of the wood and every exhale of the wind sounded like a deliberate message, a coded invitation to confront something buried deep within the house history, or perhaps within my own troubled memories. Gathering every ounce of courage, I stepped forward into the center of the attic. The beam of my light wavered as my hand trembled uncontrollably. I moved closer to the mirror, where the figure seemed most concentrated, and in its reflection I caught a glimpse of something more, a flash of an old photograph pinned crookedly to the wall behind it. I couldn't tell at first, but as I drew near, I recognized it as a portrait of a solemn young woman with sorrowful eyes. A date scrawled at the bottom read 1912. A chill ran down my spine as the pieces began to merge in my mind. My grandmother had once told me stories of a tragic occurrence in this house, a long ago death, a mysterious loss, and a promise that the spirit of the departed would forever roam the upper floors, seeking recognition and closure. Had I unwittingly provoked this specter simply by setting foot in the very place where it once lived? Or was it that the presence had lain dormant, waiting for me, the new occupant, to stir it awake? The atmosphere thickened, and the air grew colder. The figure in the mirror began to shift imperceptibly, its form elongating and contracting as if struggling against some unseen force. I could now distinctly see a pair of lips part in a silent plea, and in that fleeting moment, a torrent of images flooded my mind. Memories of a life before a sudden, inexplicable tragedy, the sound of laughter silenced by sorrow, the echo of footsteps in an empty corridor, and a desperate cry for help that went unanswered. The figure moved with an unnatural fluidity toward me. I felt as though it was not merely an image, but a presence, a being desperate to make contact. I took a cautious step back, my entire body trembling as if iced over. Then, in a voice that seemed to come from both nowhere and everywhere, it whispered, "Remember. Please remember." I stared at the words, caught between disbelief and terror. What did it mean? Was it pleading for recognition of a forgotten history, a forgotten name? Was it warning me of a danger that loomed over this place? My mind churned with questions, and each creak of the ancient wood felt like an answer I was too afraid to hear. The oppressive silence broke with a sudden, harsh sound, a loud thump behind me that resounded through the attic like a final, ominous drum. I spun around, heart in my throat, only to see the heavy shadow of a large trunk sliding slightly across the floor. Nothing else moved, yet the echo of that sound reverberated within me. In that charged instant, I recognized that this was not a figment conjured by my overactive mind. It was real. This presence was real. I fumbled with my phone and managed to record a few seconds of what I could only describe as a low, mournful hum that emanated from the very walls of the attic. The sound was both beautiful and heartbreaking, a dirge for forgotten souls. As the recording continued, I saw the figure gradually recede, melting back into the surrounding gloom as if it had never been there at all. Before I could decide on my next course of action, a clatter upstairs startled me from the recording's trance. The sound of heavy footsteps, deliberate and echoing, trailed from above. I glanced toward the only door leading further into the darkness, a narrow doorway that I'd always assumed led only to storage or old bedrooms. Now it pulsed with an eerie, inviting glow. With each beat of my heart, I felt the pull of an unseen force urging me to follow the sound. Against every instinct screaming at me to flee, I moved toward that door. My hand brushed against cold, peeling wallpaper that seemed almost to tremble in anticipation. I pushed the door open slowly, and a new corridor revealed itself, a long, narrow passage lined with faded photographs and dust-covered relics. The footsteps grew louder, more insistent, until they almost drowned out my own panicked breathing. I forced myself forward, using the beam of my phone to guide my steps. Every door along the corridor was slightly ajar, as though each one carried a secret waiting to be unveiled. At the far end, I discovered a door that was slightly different from the rest. Its surface was smudged with streaks of dark, dried blood. I couldn't tell if it was real or merely the play of shadows, but it filled me with a cold, aching dread. With trembling determination, I pushed it open. Inside was a small room that looked more like a forgotten study than part of the main house. A single, time-worn desk stood in one corner, and above it, on the wall, hung an ornate mirror in an intricately carved frame. The air in that room was even colder than the corridor, and it seemed to vibrate with the echoes of the past. There, at the desk, lay a battered leather journal with yellowed pages. I picked it up, the weight of it sending a shiver down my spine. As I opened the journal, a message was scrawled across the first page in shaky, desperate handwriting. "I am trapped in these walls. Remember me. They took everything, my name, my love, my life." The faded ink and the style of the letter suggested a century-old sorrow, a tragedy that had long been buried. At that moment, I felt a presence behind me, a cold breath on the back of my neck that made my skin crawl. I spun around, heart pounding, but saw nothing. The silence was absolute, as if the very air had held its breath. I clutched the journal to my chest, unsure if it was a warning, a plea, or a confession. Then came another whisper, clearer this time, and almost pleading. "Help me." The voice was soft, yet imbued with immense sorrow. It tugged at my very soul as if it were a part of me long forgotten. I stepped forward, unable to resist any longer, and placed a trembling hand on the cold wall. In that contact, I felt a surge of emotions, pain, loss, and an overwhelming loneliness that mirrored my own isolation. It was as if the ghost of that lost soul reached out, desperate for acknowledgement, for someone to remember its existence. For what seemed like hours, I stood there in that small study, oscillating between terror and empathy. The whispers continued intermittently, sometimes a soft murmur, sometimes a desperate cry. I could not tell if they were coming from the walls, the floorboards, or the very air itself. All I knew was that something in this house had been broken long ago, and now the damage was not confined to wood and dust, but to the fragile remnants of human hearts. The storm outside reached a fevered pitch, and lightning illuminated the room in jagged bursts. In one such flash, I saw a glimpse of a face in the mirror above the desk, a face drawn with heartbreak and despair. In that split second, I understood that the specter was not my enemy, but a wounded soul reaching out for release. The diary and the shattered reflections were fragments of a history steeped in forgotten pain, a life that had been taken away by circumstances too terrible to bear. I resolved then to do something. I had to remember. I had to honor the plea of this unseen presence by discovering its story, by piecing together the fragments of a long-forgotten tragedy. I dashed down the corridor back to the living room, clutching the journal as if it were a lifeline, and started to search through the house for clues, old letters tucked behind faded wallpaper, photographs hidden under loose floorboards, and even records of local deaths archived in a dusty family cabinet. Every discovery deepened the mystery. I found an old newspaper clipping from 1912 detailing a bitter tragedy. A young woman, known only by her first name, Eleanor, had vanished mysteriously after a scandalous affair within this very house. Rumors had swirled for years, whispers of betrayal, sorrow, and a restless spirit left behind. The journal's writing mirrored the style of those days, and the despair was unmistakable. As the night wore on, I felt the presence drawing nearer. Shadows crept along the walls, and I could sense the ghost's watchful eyes tracking my every move. I began to fear that by delving too deeply, I might awaken forces far beyond my control. Yet, every fiber of my being screamed that I could not abandon Eleanor to the silence of the attic forever. I had to remember her. I had to set her spirit free. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps behind me, the same slow, measured thuds from earlier, echoed again from the staircase. I backed away from the desk, journal in trembling grip, as the sound became nearer, and then paused right at the threshold of the study. My pulse raced, and for a frozen moment, the world seemed to slow. Then, as if in response to my silent plea, the door behind me creaked open. I spun around and caught sight of the ghostly figure emerging from the shadow of the corridor, its hollow eyes fixed upon me with an intensity that cut through the darkness. There was no malice in its gaze, only an overwhelming, unfulfilled longing for recognition and resolution. The figure's voice, now clear as crystal in my mind, murmured, "I'm so tired. Please help me remember." The plea resonated through me, echoing the quiet sorrow that I had felt in the cold touch against the wall. I whispered in response, "I will not let you fade away. I'll remember, I promise." The specter's form wavered, as though caught between existence and oblivion. I felt an almost tangible weight lifting from the room as the ghost's features softened. For a moment, the oppressive dread eased, replaced by an inexplicable compassion. I reached out toward the figure, but as my fingers neared the ephemeral form, it dissipated like smoke in the wind, leaving only a fading echo of its desperate call. In that silence, I understood that the entity's message was not to instill terror, but to remind me of the human cost of forgotten history. With the journal clutched tight and a determination to uncover Eleanor's truth, I left the attic and returned to the living room. My hands still shook as I sat at the dining table, surrounded by documents and clippings that painted a tragic tapestry of love, betrayal, and loss spanning over a century. The storm raged on outside, but within me, a quiet resolve took root. I spent hours piecing together Eleanor's story from scraps of old records, family anecdotes long buried under time, and the raw confessions of a heartache so deep it echoed in every creak of my home. I learned that she had been silenced by those who feared her scandalous beauty and fierce passion, a woman whose memory was deliberately erased. It seemed the house itself had been complicit in keeping her secret hidden, only now demanding that someone acknowledge the truth. By the time dawn broke, pale light streamed through the windows, and the oppressive atmosphere began to recede. I had gathered enough evidence to honor her memory. I printed out clippings, transcribed parts of the old diary passages, and even made a promise to myself to share her story with anyone who would listen. As I set my things in order, I felt one last, soft whisper brush past my ear, a gentle thank you, or perhaps a plea for forgiveness, echoing in the quiet morning air. Even now, as I write these words in the safety of daylight, I can't shake the lingering presence of that night. I still hear faint footsteps in the attic on stormy evenings. Sometimes I catch myself glancing upward, wondering if Eleanor's gaze still follows me, silently urging me to remember her story, and the haunting truth that every home, every old relic, carries the weight of forgotten souls. I've since moved on and left that house behind, but the memory of that night remains etched into my very being. In our modern lives, we often dismiss the quiet spaces of our past, the dark corners of memory. But sometimes, in the stillness of a stormy night, when the only sound is that of a lonesome heartbeat and the soft thumps from above, we are reminded that everything has a history. And sometimes, what watches from the attic is not here to harm us. It is here to be remembered. I will carry Eleanor's story with me always, as a reminder to honor every lost voice and to listen closely to the whispers in the dark. For in remembering, we might just set the restless souls free, and in doing so, perhaps finally find peace for ourselves. The watching in the attic is my testament to the eerie truth that even in our solitude, the past will always find a way to reach us. And as long as there are secrets hidden in the rafters, someone, somewhere, is watching. I still remember the first time I set foot in the specialized overnight unit of our urban hospital, a labyrinth of quiet hallways and muted tones that, on the surface, appeared benign. I was a resident doctor, freshly assigned to observing care for long-term patients who occupied rooms that lay in the unspoken margins of the hospital. There was an unanticipated melancholy in that unit, a heavy silence that went beyond the ordinary exhaustion of night shifts. At first, I chalked it up to the loneliness of the late hours and the weary resignation of patients nearing the ends of their journeys. But it didn't take long for me to sense that something far more profound was at work here, a mystery that seemed to seep into the very walls of the building. My nights began with the relentless hum of machines and the steady, occasional beep of a monitor registering a life quietly ticking on. The lights were dimmed to a comforting level, yet in that semi-darkness, the halls took on a surreal quality. At times, I felt as if I were walking through the corridors of a memory rather than a living institution, as if every footstep echoed the lost voices of those long past. I remember passing by an old, slightly tarnished mirror in the nurse's station and catching a glimpse of a shadow that wasn't entirely my own, a fleeting, unaccountable presence that left me unsettled long after I had resumed my rounds. As the nights progressed, the unit began to reveal subtle signs of an unseen history. I first noticed it on a humid summer night when the hum of the air conditioning was abruptly replaced by a series of soft murmurs. I was reviewing patient files near a window when a voice, barely a whisper, murmured my name. I spun around quickly, heart hammering in my chest, only to find the room empty, save for the flickering light of my desk lamp. That night, sleep was elusive, chased away by the persistent feeling that the very air was charged with unspoken secrets. I tried to convince myself that it had to be the product of exhaustion or a trick of acoustics, but the feeling grew stronger with each passing shift. I began to notice other inexplicable occurrences. The old clock in the corridor inexplicably stopped at precisely 3:07 a.m. on several nights. The temperature would drop suddenly in an empty room, and I found several old personal mementos, a locket, a faded handkerchief, a name engraved on a piece of worn-out wood, appearing in places where they shouldn't be. It was as if remnants of the past were making their silent, spectral return. Every now and then, while making my routine rounds, I would catch a glimpse of a figure in the corner of my eye, a hazy outline of a person whose presence stirred both sorrow and curiosity. I soon deduced that these encounters weren't random illusions cast by my tired mind, but the deliberate, albeit cryptic, echoing of a story that had long ago been silenced by the cold indifference of a broken system. One night, after an exhausting shift filled with fleeting apparitions and disembodied voices, I found solace in the quiet solitude of the administrative corridor. I huddled over a collection of old patient files, yellowed and nearly worn to nothingness, trying to piece together the puzzle of the unit's past. What I unearthed was a series of tragic narratives, individual lives that had faded from institutional memory without so much as a proper farewell. There was Mrs. Aldridge, a woman whose gentle smile belied the deep sadness of her final days. Mr. Hargrove, whose eyes once sparkled with dreams now permanently closed, and many other souls whose names barely left a trace in the modern records. As I read each story, I felt their silent voices merging into one collective whisper, an echo that seemed to saturate every corner of the unit. I began to wonder if the murmurs I heard were not mere products of my imagination, but rather the accumulated grief and regret of all those forgotten by time. Then, on an unusually heavy night, I experienced the phenomenon that defied every rational explanation I had clung to so far. After a long day filled with meticulous charting and brief, anxious conversations with patients and their family members, I sat alone in one of the subdued waiting areas between treatment zones. I found myself enveloped by an inexplicable melancholy, as if I had stepped into someone else's private memory. In the distance, the soft strains of what sounded like a piano playing a sorrowful melody reached me, a tune so evocative that it brought tears to my eyes. I followed the sound with a mix of dread and desperate curiosity, passing through corridors that seemed to stretch on far longer than I remembered. At the source, I discovered nothing more than a spare break room with peeling wallpaper and a solitary, dusty window. Yet, as I lingered there, the haunting melody grew louder, each note resonating with the heartbeat of long-forgotten souls. I soon became convinced that the music was not produced by any ordinary means. It was as if the walls themselves were singing in a language of loss, a lament for the lives that had passed by unnoticed. In the following weeks, the mysterious occurrences escalated, and so did the intensity of my introspection. The voices in the unit grew bolder in their insistence that I needed to remember, to acknowledge something that had been buried beneath years of forgetfulness and negligence. I started to document every occurrence meticulously, logging every whisper, temperature drop, and shadow that moved in a way that defied the predictable rhythms of the night. What began as academic curiosity slowly transformed into an obsession, a need to unravel the hidden tapestry woven into the fabric of the hospital's history. I reached out to some of the long-standing nurses and administrative staff who had worked through multiple eras of the institution. Their recollections were as fragmented as they were vivid, stories of patients lost in bureaucratic limbo, of care deferred until it was too late, and of quiet acts of heroism buried beneath the avalanche of modern technology. In hushed conversations during breaks, they recounted events that were seldom spoken of in the harsh light of day. Their words painted a picture of a healthcare system that, in its relentless pursuit of efficiency and sanitized professionalism, had inadvertently discarded the most vulnerable among us. These conversations, often laden with the raw emotion of personal loss, were as compelling as the spectral hints that visited me during my shifts. One evening, as I was completing my rounds with a growing sense of purpose and trepidation, I encountered a moment of surreal confrontation that would forever alter my perspective on what I had been witnessing. I was returning from a particularly long examination of a patient in a dimly lit room where I had found evidence of neglect hidden beneath layers of bureaucracy and sorrow, when I noticed a figure standing motionless by the far end of the corridor. At first, it looked like one of the elderly patients, but as I moved closer, I realized that this figure did not belong to any living body I knew. The person was translucent, dressed in clothing reminiscent of a bygone era, with eyes that seemed to flicker with both hope and despair. In that split second, the weight of countless untold stories pressed down on me, and I recognized with a jolt that I was face to face with a spirit tethered to these grounds. I recalled the name of a patient I had read about in one of the old files, a young woman who had succumbed to a tragic illness, her pain and pleas stifled by the sterile walls of the hospital. As I reached out with trembling fingers, the apparition slowly dissipated, leaving behind a lingering chill and a profound sense of responsibility. I felt as though that ghostly presence had entrusted me with this sacred duty of bearing witness to the truths that had been hidden away. In the days that followed this encounter, the unit seemed to hum with an almost imperceptible urgency. The wind in the ventilation ducts sounded almost like soft sighs, and the overhead lights cast flickering patterns that danced on the walls like ephemeral memories. Every detail, every sensation, took on a heightened significance as I began to piece together not just the individual narratives, but a broader tapestry of systemic indifference and sorrow. I started to believe that the nocturnal phenomena were a collective outcry, a desperate attempt by forgotten souls to reclaim their rightful memory, to force the living to face the cost of neglect that they had so comfortably absorbed. I would sometimes find myself sitting quietly in a corner, notebooks open and pen trembling in hand, trying to capture the essence of those fleeting moments. Each scribbled note and hastily recorded observation felt like a plea for the past to be acknowledged and for the present to learn from the silent errors of history. Gradually, the unit revealed not just its ghosts, but also the hidden intricacies of its own existence. One humid night, while I was examining a file that detailed the final hours of a patient whose story had been buried under layers of official reports, I noticed a detail that sent shivers down my spine. The records hinted at a network of oversights where critical warnings were drowned out by the clamor of modernity and the relentless pursuit of statistical success. It became painfully clear that the tragic fates of many patients were not isolated incidents, but part of a broader pattern, a pattern of systemic abandonment and clinical detachment. Even as I documented these findings, an eerie silence would descend on the ward as though the very building was holding its breath in anticipation of the truth being laid bare. I recalled nights when, in the midst of routine tasks, I would suddenly feel a burning awareness of eyes upon me, an invisible audience, as if the collective soul of the unit were silently judging my every step. One particularly long night remains seared into my memory. After hours of painstaking work cataloging discrepancies in patient records, I finally decided to step out for a brief respite. The corridors were unusually quiet, bathed in a ghostly light that blurred the line between shadow and substance. I wandered aimlessly, my thoughts heavy with the weight of the uncovered truths, when I came upon an old nurse's station that had been abandoned for years. There, amidst dusty instruments and long-forgotten files, I discovered a small drawer containing a bundle of handwritten letters. Each letter was addressed in careful, looping script, bearing the names of patients whose lives had been shortened by negligence, and each contained a desperate plea for accountability. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, reading every word until the anguished cries and silent promises of these letters intertwined with the quiet rhythm of the night. The documents served not only as a record of past misfortunes, but as a tangible connection to the souls who had once wandered these halls, their voices now echoing in the footsteps of a resident doctor determined to carry their message forward. Over the following weeks, the spectral manifestations grew more deliberate in their presence. I began to sense a duality in the experiences. On one level, there was a haunting melancholy of the unit, a palpable feeling of loss and regret that seemed to hang in the air. On another level, the encounters took on an almost interactive quality, as though the very essence of the past was attempting to communicate with me directly. I recall an instance when, during my routine checks, an old bedside clock began to chime softly at odd intervals. Every time it struck, I heard a fragment of a whisper, a single word carried on the wind, barely audible yet full of meaning. In one such moment, the word "remember" resonated deep within me, stirring emotions that I could no longer ignore. It was as if every creak of the floor, every soft flutter of a curtain, was a deliberate reminder that the past was demanding recognition. In the midst of these escalating mysteries, I found my work becoming more than a mere duty. It evolved into an impassioned quest for redemption. I began reaching out to the families of former patients, piecing together recollections that provided crucial insights into a history many had forgotten. Their grief was palpable, laced with the raw anger of loss, and yet it was tempered by the hope that our stories, when shared, could lead to change. I compiled a silent dossier, a mosaic of records, letters, recorded whispers, and my own eyewitness accounts, each piece a testament to the neglected souls of the unit. Every new discovery filled me with a searing determination that overrode the creeping dread of working alone in the dead of night. I found myself growing increasingly isolated as the relentless pace of my investigations took a toll on my emotional well-being. The hospital corridors no longer offered the transient refuge they once had. Instead, they now felt like the confines of an unseen prison, their edges lined with the specters of the past. There were nights when I would lie awake on the hard cot in the on-call room, the silence punctuated only by the distant sound of my own breathing. In those moments, my mind would replay the ethereal symphony of murmurs and half-formed words, the urgency of a long-dead voice trying to break through the dam of time. I questioned my own sanity, wondering if I had become so enmeshed in the mysteries of the night that I could no longer distinguish between the real and the spectral. But even as the psychological toll mounted, I could not turn away from the truth that beckoned from the shadows. There was a power in those echoes, a reminder that, beneath the sterile facade of modern healthcare, lay the beating hearts and unfinished stories of those who had been forgotten. It was a sobering realization that forced me to confront my own vulnerabilities. The silent toll of sleepless nights, the haunting weight of unspoken regrets, and the bitter realization that sometimes the most significant battles are fought not with scalpels and prescriptions, but with remembrance and accountability. One fateful night, after a particularly grueling shift that left me physically drained and emotionally raw, I found myself once again in the quiet solitude of the unit's central corridor. The atmosphere was thick with an almost tangible presence, and I knew instinctively that I was not alone. As I walked, the temperature around me began to drop gradually, and I could see my breath forming small clouds in the cold air. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a figure, a young woman whose translucent form radiated both an unyielding sorrow and a quiet, desperate plea for vindication. The sight of her, so vivid against the pallid light of the emergency fixtures, sent a shiver down my spine that I could not dispel. In that moment, with a mixture of empathy and determination, I silently promised that I would not allow her memory to fade into oblivion. I approached slowly, each step measured, driven by the conviction that I had been chosen to listen to those who could no longer speak for themselves. There, in that solitary moment beneath the flickering lights, I reached out as if to bridge the divide between our worlds. The figure seemed to regard me with an unfathomable depth, an intensity that conveyed not malice, but a profound sorrow and longing. I whispered reassurances into the heavy silence, promising to bear witness to her pain, to recognize the injustice that had confined her spirit to this endless night. It was a fleeting encounter, yet it resonated with the full force of an entire lifetime of untold stories. As she dissipated like a wisp of smoke in the cold air, I realized that my quest was no longer just about unraveling historical negligence. It was about offering solace, about mending the fractured tapestry of memory, with the thread of empathy and accountability. In the weeks and months that followed, the nocturnal visitation continued, each encounter reinforcing the singular mission that had consumed me. I became both caretaker and chronicler, a living repository of the unit's spectral whispers and the unfulfilled promises of the past. My nights, once marked by the clinical routine of examinations and medication rounds, had transformed into a relentless vigil in honor of those voices that could no longer be ignored. Even in moments when the weight of solitude threatened to overwhelm me, I found purpose in every recorded detail, every hushed conversation with a grieving family member, and every inexplicable phenomenon that defied the laws of nature. Now, as I recount these experiences, I am compelled by a quiet urgency to share this narrative with anyone who will listen, a reminder that within the heart of modern medicine lies a repository of suppressed histories, each waiting for its moment to be acknowledged. I continue my work in that dimly lit unit, where every shadow and whisper is an invitation to remember that the past is never dead. The echoes through the night speak to us in a language of sorrow and hope, urging us to bridge the gap between the overlooked and the celebrated, between neglect and recognition. In the relentless quiet of midnight, I have discovered a personal redemption, a solemn duty to honor those who have long been forgotten, whose final breaths were lost amid the clamor of efficiency and indifference. There is an ineffable beauty in the persistence of memory. Each spectral encounter, every softly uttered word in the silence of the corridors, stands as a testament to lives that mattered. I have learned that healing is not solely about treating the body, but also about healing the collective wounds that have accumulated over generations of oversight and sorrow. The unit, with its persistent gloom and enigmatic charm, has become a sanctuary for the voices that linger in its halls, a place where the past and present coexist in a fragile equilibrium. As I continue to traverse these lonely nights, my heart beats not just for the living souls under my care, but also for the ghostly remnants that serve as poignant reminders of what we must never let fade into silence. Tonight, as I wrap up another shift in this spectral space, I stand at the threshold of a window overlooking the city's restless lights. The cool night air carries with it whispers, a quiet chorus that speaks in the language of those left behind. I feel both vulnerable and empowered, a solitary witness tasked with preserving memories too precious to be lost. My pen is my instrument of remembrance, each stroke a promise to record the transient yet eternal symphony of echoes that define these hallowed halls. In the midst of desolation and neglect, I have found purpose. I have come to understand that the true essence of healing extends far beyond physical remedies. It requires an acknowledgement of every story, every tear shed in the silence, every whisper that begs to be heard. And so, I persist. I walk the corridors with a vigilance born of empathy, a commitment to the unseen and the unheard. I have discovered that the echoes through the night do more than haunt. They call us to remember, to reconcile, and to transform a legacy of neglect into one of collective healing. With each new night, I write my own chapter into the annals of this place, a small yet significant tribute to every life that has flickered in the dim light of these corridors. I will continue to listen, to document, and to remind the world that even in the quietest moments, the past persists, urging us to seek justice, compassion, and truth. In every cold draft, every softly murmured name, and every unexplained shadow, there lies a story waiting to be told, a story that, in its raw vulnerability, reshapes our understanding of both life and the silent mysteries that surround us. Thus, as the night deepens and I prepare to embrace another long, reflective shift, I carry with me the solemn assurance that no story, no matter how shrouded in sorrow, will be allowed to vanish without a trace. The echoes in the unit are not merely remnants of bygone eras. They are affirmations of existence, a call to all who can hear, to bear witness, and to heal the wounds of memory with the gentle light of remembrance. And in that light, there is hope, however fragile, that even the darkest nights can give birth to a new dawn of understanding and compassion. I've always been drawn to the twilight hours, the moment when the hospital's sterile hum transforms into something almost otherworldly, when the relentless beeping of monitors blends with a silence so profound it feels like a living entity breathing alongside you. I was a nurse on the night shift, an honor and a curse, and the midnight ward was my assigned domain one bitterly cold winter night. I still remember that shift as if it were yesterday, every detail engraved in my mind with an intensity that has yet to fade. It began like any other night, with a quiet hope of a calm shift, but what unfolded was a slow descent into dread, a journey through the limits of sanity where the living and the dead mingled in a blur of flashing lights and whispered secrets. That night, the hospital corridors were oddly deserted, the bustle of the day replaced with an unsettling quiet that made each step echo ominously. I made my rounds, clipboard in hand, my footsteps measured and deliberate. The old building had been renovated recently, its historical structure preserved but overlaid with modern updates. Yet, as I walked past the common areas, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The fluorescent lights seemed to struggle against the darkness, flickering in a way that blurred the boundaries between reality and the phantom world that I was about to encounter. I started my shift at the reception of the midnight ward, a section of the hospital that had been closed off for years due to its dark reputation. Rumors, whispered in the break room over lukewarm coffee, told tales of inexplicable events, mysterious patient disappearances, and an oppressive atmosphere that swallowed hope. I dismissed these stories as mere fodder for idle gossip, a twisted attempt by colleagues to make the long, lonely nights seem bearable, until I encountered what I can only describe as the inexplicable. As I checked the chart of a seemingly routine set of patients, a chill that had nothing to do with the winter seeped into my bones. In the reflection of the polished metal surfaces of an unused trolley, I thought I saw a figure, a pale, shadowy presence that disappeared as soon as I turned to look directly at it. My heart hammered, and for a fleeting moment, I wondered if exhaustion was playing tricks on me. But deep down, an instinct told me that the figure was real, that I had intruded into a domain where the rules of physics and logic held no sway. I tried to dismiss the sensation as nothing more than fatigue-induced hallucination, yet the air itself grew heavy with an inexplicable sense of foreboding as I continued down the deserted corridor. The real terror crept in later that night when I was assigned to check on a patient room that was strangely cold, a temperature that plummeted despite every attempt of the modern HVAC system to maintain a comfortable climate. The door creaked ominously as I stepped inside, and I was struck by an overwhelming feeling of being watched. In the dim glow of my flashlight, the room revealed nothing but the sterile bed and an assortment of dated medical equipment that seemed out of place in this state-of-the-art facility. As I turned to leave, a soft, almost inaudible whisper brushed against my ear, a sound that made my skin crawl and my blood run cold. It felt as though a long-forgotten sorrow was seeping into my very soul, a lament from someone who had once been here and was still echoing through the halls of the midnight ward. At first, I rationalized the experience as a trick of acoustics, a stray sound bouncing off the old walls, but the events of that night could not be explained away so easily. Over the next few shifts, I began to notice more signs that defied the mundane explanations that my rational mind desperately clung to. Objects would shift ever so slightly when no one was around, a door left ajar when it had been firmly closed minutes before, and a persistent, chilling draft that seemed to emanate from nowhere. The stark, white corridors would sometimes become painted with shadows that danced in shapes no human could create, and the persistent hum of the hospital would be pierced by a sorrowful melody, as if a hidden piano were playing in an abandoned room somewhere deep within the building. The turning point came one stormy night when the building was plunged into darkness by a power outage. The emergency lights kicked in, casting eerie, elongated shadows that made every corner of the midnight ward appear to harbor unspeakable secrets. I remember the storm outside, thunder roaring as though the heavens themselves were angry, rain lashing against the windows with a force that seemed to hammer home the reality of our isolation. With the corridors now illuminated only by the desperate glow of emergency fixtures, my every step felt like venturing deeper into a nightmare that had been brewing long before I ever set foot in that ward. It was then that I first encountered what I can only describe as the phantom patient. I was making my rounds near the far end of the corridor when I saw a figure standing motionless by a closed door. The outline was unmistakable, a patient in faded hospital attire, face obscured by shadows, standing in an unnatural stillness that defied logic. My pulse quickened, and I approached slowly, heart pounding in my ears. I called out softly, "Hello? Are you okay?" But the figure did not respond. Instead, it seemed to tilt its head in a silent plea, eyes hollow yet brimming with sorrow. In that surreal moment, I felt an electric charge run through me, an overwhelming sadness that was not my own, as if the phantom was reaching out from a deep, painful past. For days after, that image haunted me. I began noticing the phantom's presence not only in the corridors, but also in unexpected places. A fleeting glimpse behind a window, the chill by an empty bed, a soft, sorrowful moan that echoed in the dead of night. I started piecing together fragments of conversations, snippets of lore from retired staff, and the few old files I managed to get my hands on that hinted at a tragic story from decades past. There had once been a patient in the midnight ward who had died under mysterious circumstances, a patient whose death was shrouded in controversy, whose final moments were marked by terror and pain. The whispers among the old-timers spoke of negligence, a rushed diagnosis, and a cover-up that left no one to mourn but a lingering spirit that could not rest. It was during one of these long, sleepless nights that I decided to delve deeper into the hospital's past. With the assistance of some old medical records and the hesitant recollections of a few senior colleagues, I uncovered a story too harrowing to believe at first. The phantom I had seen was tied to a patient who had been inexplicably left in a state of limbo between life and death, a case of medical mishap compounded by the hospital's desperate attempts to preserve its reputation. The more I learned, the more I began to see parallels between the past and the present. My own experiences, the inexplicable cold spots, the drifting shadows, the sense of being watched, suddenly took on a new meaning. They were not random hallucinations born of overwork and isolation. They were echoes of a deep-seated tragedy, a ghost from the past trying to emerge from the confines of time. One night, as the storm battered the hospital with renewed fury, I found myself alone in the corridor once more, the echo of my footsteps the only sound breaking the oppressive silence. The air was thick with anticipation, and every nerve in my body screamed that something was about to happen. I advanced cautiously to the door of the midnight ward, the one door that should have been locked and sealed away from the rest of the hospital, yet now it stood slightly ajar, as if inviting me to uncover its secrets. My hand trembled as I pushed it open, the door groaning in protest. A gust of icy air whipped past me, carrying with it a whisper, a chorus of voices pleading for release, for recognition, for justice. Inside the ward, the dim glow of the emergency lights cast long, distorted shapes on the walls. The patient beds were arranged in a haphazard formation, and a thick layer of dust indicated that this room had not seen regular use in years. As I ventured further, my eyes landed on an old portrait pinned haphazardly to a wall, showing smiling faces of nurses and patients alike from a bygone era. The contrast between that cheerful, hopeful image and the desolation of the present sent shivers down my spine. I could almost feel the weight of their untold stories, their joys and sorrows lingering in the silence. I began searching for any clues, any remnants of the life that had once filled this neglected space. My search led me to a corner of the ward where a series of scattered personal effects lay undisturbed: a faded scarf, a pair of glasses with a cracked frame, and a journal with a leather cover. The journal, surprisingly intact despite the passage of time, was filled with entries written in a hurried, anguished hand. As I read through the entries, I learned of a patient named Evelyn, a woman whose life had been marred by misfortune and neglect. Her final entry detailed her pain and despair, her words trembling with the weight of impending loss. But what struck me most was her reference to the voices of the ward, a line that resonated with the ethereal sounds I had heard in the dead of night. In that moment, it all began to make sense. The spectral figure I had seen was not an anomaly, but a manifestation of a spirit desperate to be heard, to have her story acknowledged. The hospital, with its sterile floors and bureaucratic indifference, had long since forgotten Evelyn. Yet, in the depths of the midnight ward, her memory lived on, a living echo in every cold draft and each unsettling whisper. That night, I found myself unable to sleep, driven by an insatiable need to uncover every hidden detail of her tragic tale. The hospital records were sparse, the documentation nearly obliterated by time and inattention, but the fragments I pieced together painted a picture of negligence and sorrow. It became evident that Evelyn's death was not a mere accident of fate, but a deliberate act concealed by powerful forces within the institution. The more I dug, the more I realized that her spirit, along with those of countless others, had become the unintended custodians of the hospital's darkest secrets. I began to notice subtle shifts in the ward's ambience as I spent more nights there. The phantom patient appeared with increasing regularity, sometimes lingering in the doorway as though offering silent testimony, sometimes gliding silently past me, leaving behind an aura of despair that clung to my skin like cobwebs. In one particularly harrowing encounter, I was assisting a patient in a nearby room when I felt an icy hand brush against my shoulder. I spun around, only to see nothing but the flickering shadows dancing on the wall. My pulse pounded so hard that I could hear it in my ears, and a profound sense of isolation gripped me, as though I were the only living soul in a realm of perpetual twilight. I was left grappling with the terrifying possibility that I was entangled in something far larger and more sinister than a series of unfortunate coincidences. During one of these unsettling nights, as I made my rounds with a heaviness in my heart and a mounting dread, I paused by an empty bed that exuded a coldness that defied explanation. The air around me seemed to vibrate with a sorrowful energy, an echo of voices so indistinct yet insistent that I couldn't ignore them. In a moment of dire clarity, I closed my eyes, trying to attune myself to the energy in the room. I could almost hear a murmur, a desperate plea carried on a current of icy wind, imploring me to uncover the truth. In that ethereal moment, everything crystallized. The phantom patient was not a mere figment or a trick of the light. She was a messenger, a restless soul born from a grave injustice, trying to remind the living of debts unpaid and wrongs unavenged. The realization propelled me into action. I began documenting every anomalous occurrence in meticulous detail, notes on the shifting shadows, recordings of the faint whispers in the halls, meticulous sketches of the spectral figure as she appeared to me in fleeting glimpses. I even started discreetly speaking with the few remaining long-term staff members who had witnessed inexplicable events over the years. Their accounts, filled with a resigned sorrow and a sense of helpless inevitability, resonated with my own experiences, confirming that what I had encountered was not isolated but part of a broader, anguished tapestry of the hospital's haunted past. As I delved deeper into this mystery, strange coincidences began to surface that linked the present to the tragic events of decades past. Unexplained gaps in the hospital's records, a ward that had been officially decommissioned yet inexplicably active on night shifts, and a series of whispered warnings left in the margins of old patient files, all converged into a tapestry of evidence that pointed to a systemic cover-up. The deeper I dug, the more I felt as though I were up against an impenetrable wall of institutional denial and corruption. Every time I attempted to bring the truth to light, inexplicable accidents and subtle threats emerged, forcing me to question whether I was meddling in forces beyond mere human malice. One rainy night, as I sat hunched over my desk in the quiet solitude of the administrative corridor, Reviewing a collection of dusty medical records, I began to notice a pattern. The dates, the names, the circumstances of death, they all shared a chilling common thread. It wasn't just Evelyn's story. There were countless others whose lives had been cut short under dubious circumstances, their voices silenced by a collective insistence on preserving appearances. I felt a surge of anger and determination, a need to honor those forgotten souls and expose the hidden truth behind the facade of professionalism that cloaked our institution. With trembling hands, I began compiling my findings into a comprehensive report, one that detailed not only the paranormal experiences I had endured, but also the tangible evidence of neglect and malfeasance that had left a trail of sorrow in its wake. Then, in a moment that still haunts my every waking hour, everything came to a head. Late one night, as the wind howled outside and the hospital's walls seemed to groan under the weight of accumulated despair, I was alone in the midnight ward again. The temperature dropped sharply, and I could see my breath curling in front of me like ghostly tendrils. It was then that the phantom patient appeared before me with an intensity that defied all logic. No longer did she appear as a mere shadow at the edge of vision. She stood directly in my path, her eyes filled with a plea that transcended words. In that heart-stopping moment, as thunder boomed overhead and the fabric of reality seemed to tear at the seams, she reached out with a spectral hand, her touch simultaneously cold and filled with an inexplicable warmth that belied the horror of her appearance. Time slowed, and every second stretched into an eternity of terror and empathy. I could feel her anguish, her desperate need for acknowledgement, and I realized with a jolt of clarity that this was my final chance to set things right. In that tense, surreal encounter, the ward around me seemed to fade into insignificance. The oppressive shadows, the cold drafts, the echoes of lost souls, all merged into one overwhelming manifestation of sorrow and rage. With a voice that trembled between terror and resolve, I spoke softly, promising to unearth the truth behind the tragedy that had bound her to this place. It was as if every whisper of pain, every silent accusation, and every tear of the forgotten flowed into that moment, transforming it into a convergence of past and present. I vowed to honor her memory, to carry the burden of her story with every fiber of my being, and to expose the corruption and negligence that had allowed such horrors to persist within the walls of our hospital. In the days that followed, I took my findings to the hospital administration, armed with documented evidence and the raw accounts of those who had witnessed events that defied rational explanation. The response was a mixture of incredulity and thinly veiled hostility, a refusal to revisit the past, and a desperate desire to maintain the sanctity of appearances. Yet, even as they dismissed my claims as the ramblings of an overworked nurse haunted by stress and exhaustion, I knew that I had set something into motion. That fateful night in the midnight ward had changed me irrevocably, opening my eyes to the reality that sometimes the most unassailable institutions hide their sins behind polished facades and layers of bureaucratic indifference. I had become both witness and unwilling custodian of a tragedy that spanned decades, a living testament to the echoes of sorrow that linger in the dark spaces of our world. Even now, as I recount these experiences in the quiet after hours of another night shift, I find that the memories are as vivid as ever. The phantom patient's face, etched in sorrow and defiance, appears to me in reflective surfaces and fleeting shadows. The cold drafts and soft murmurs in the corridor serve as constant reminders that the past is never truly dead. It lingers, waiting for someone brave enough or desperate enough to listen. My nights are no longer just a series of routine tasks. They are a journey into the heart of darkness, a quest to give voice to those whose lives were snuffed out in silence and neglect. The midnight ward is not merely a section of the hospital. It is a repository of forgotten dreams, unfulfilled promises, and a haunting call for justice that refuses to be ignored. I continue to work those long nights, each shift an ongoing vigil, each moment a reminder that some spirits are too restless to rest. The line between the living and the dead is thin here, blurred by the weight of hidden truths and the echoes of unresolved agony. Despite the fear and the isolation, I cling to the belief that by speaking out, by documenting and sharing these horrors, I might not only free the ghostly patients trapped by their own tragic fates, but also shine a light on the systemic failures that allowed their stories to be silenced in the first place. I am no longer just a nurse tending to the needs of the living. I have become an emissary for the dead, a chronicler of a past that demands to be remembered, however horrifying that truth may be. And so, every night as I walk the deserted corridors of the hospital, I do so with the weight of a promise made to a spectral figure whose sorrow was as real as the chill in my bones, whose silent plea for justice resonates with every creak of the floor and every flicker of the failing lights. In the silence of the midnight ward, I have come to understand that the horror is not merely in the apparitions that cross my path, but in the deliberate and callous abandonment of those who once trusted this institution with their lives. It is a horror that festers in the neglected records, in the hushed whispers of staff long resigned to silence, and in my own determination to break that cycle of neglect. As I continue my nightly rounds, I carry with me the memory of that fateful night, an experience that shattered the veil between myth and reality, forcing me to confront a darkness that goes far beyond the supernatural. I speak these words not as a tale of mere ghostly encounters, but as a personal confession of the enduring struggle to honor the lives lost in the shadows of modern medicine. In every frozen breath and every tremulous heartbeat, the phantom patient lives on, a constant reminder that some stories are too powerful to be forgotten, and that in the endless night, even the coldest rooms can whisper of redemption, of reckoning, and of an unyielding quest for truth that defies the boundaries of death itself. After the storm, I found him, a drenched stranger drifting in my pool. In that moment, I wished I'd never welcomed him inside my home. Even as a child, I was captivated by the strange gifts the sea brought ashore. Every summer at my Grammy's weathered beach house, a relic perched on the edge of the shore, I would wander barefoot around the water's edge. In Florida, the storms never ended. Each tempest brought a peculiar mix of debris and creatures that transformed our pool into a miniature ocean. I remember the thrill of discovering life among the broken branches and seaweed. Once, as I knelt at the water's edge with my dollar store net, a sudden ripple made me jump back. I expected a sea creature to emerge from the murk. Instead, it was only an old plank of wood. But then the water burst upward, drenching me, and for one fleeting moment, I believed I'd caught fish. That was when laughter echoed. Roman, the odd kid from next door with eyes too large and a perpetual smirk, had been watching. He was notorious for researching in Grammy's pool, though his true intentions were as murky as the water itself. Roman always prodded, always intruding. "What you looking for?" he'd say, his tone half mocking, half curious. I'd reply curtly, "Fish," and he'd tease that he too was on the hunt. I tried to shoo him away, but he never took no for an answer. His constant presence along the broken fence made it clear he'd heard more than I intended. Before I could shout for help, he slipped back into the water, another unwelcome shadow in my solitary quest. My searches yielded marvels: vibrant starfish, stray jellyfish from the tide, even a baby shark my mom had to rescue with a net. Yet nothing filled the void, the elusive secret both my Grammy and Roman whispered about: fish people. Grammy wasn't always the sharp, quirky storyteller I remembered. Diagnosed with a vicious form of Alzheimer's early on, she spent her later years locked in the haze of forgetfulness. But when her mind cleared, she spun tales of fantastical encounters beneath the waves. I clung to those stories like lifelines, desperate to preserve the memory of the woman I loved even as she slipped away. I recall my 10th birthday clearly. The power failed amid my favorite TV show, and while Grammy slept on the couch, I remembered Mom's storm preparedness. I gathered my flashlight, water bottles, snacks, and her medications, then helped her down to the basement. Usually quiet and distant by then, Grammy suddenly looked at me with a smile, a spark of her old self, and asked, "Can I tell you about the fish people, Charlotte?" I knew then that her stories were more than mere fables. They were echoes of a promise she once made. She told me of a beautiful boy from the sea, Sebastian, who had swept her away with dreams of a secret underwater kingdom. He asked me to be his queen. She'd laugh, recalling that day with a bittersweet glow. We were to run away together to a world beneath the waves. But as her tale turned darker, her voice wavered. She admitted that day after day, she waited on the shore, even as time and memory betrayed her. "I waited until sunrise became sunset," she whispered, a confession of endless longing. Years later, as middle school dragged on, Roman's antics made me a laughingstock, nicknames and jeers that stung more than the ocean's salt. I clung to the fantasy of finding Sebastian, hoping that if I could rescue him for Grammy, maybe I could mend some of the shattered memories. I even began sending letters into the surf, believing that the sea might one day return her lost love. Then came the day when the past collided violently with the present. I received a terse text from Roman. "I'm not cleaning the pool." Apparently, as per an odd twist in Grammy's will, he was now a co-owner of the house, chosen because he resembled the mythical Sebastian. My parents were furious, but I had long since accepted that some ghosts of the past never truly fade away. That night, as a mild storm raged, I took refuge in the basement of the old house. Memories of Grammy's ceramic fish ornaments and the shells she claimed were gifts from Sebastian haunted me. Lost in thought, I nearly forgot the open gate until a sudden, frantic text shattered the silence. "Shut the gate." Idiot! I dashed outside into the howling wind, and that's when I saw it, a strange, ethereal movement beneath the dark surface of my pool. I dropped to my knees and grabbed my old net, eyes straining to follow a mysterious greenish glow beneath the water. Memories of childhood excitement mingled with dread as I waded into the pool. The water rippled, and then I saw him, a young man, early 20s, with a body half merged into something unearthly. His thick, tangled hair clung to his damp skin, interwoven with bits of driftwood and sea glass. When he emerged, his eyes met mine, a painful, silent plea amid blood streaks across the tiles. He bore an injury, a deep gash in what I now recognized as a fin that glimmered with the same shade as my own blood. I signaled him to wait and clumsily scrambled for my flashlight. Amid a wild gust of wind that nearly knocked me under, he pulled me to the surface. With trembling hands, I managed to drag him to Grammy's old bathtub, determined to tend to his wounds. As I bathed him, I recalled Grammy's whispered lore. Children of the sea must be soaked through, or they'll suffocate on land. I treated his bleeding scales with the care of someone trying to save a long-forgotten myth. But even as I asked if his name was Sebastian, he shook his head, clearly offended at my assumption. His silence, punctuated only by glances at my scattered shampoo bottles, deepened the mystery. For hours, we lay there, me recounting stories of Grammy's merman and him listening in silence. I marveled at how his skin shifted in the dim light, the transformation of flesh into scales reminiscent of a slow, creeping virus. His tail, too, was a marvel, a strange hybrid of fin and fused legs. At one point, just as I was losing myself in the fragile hope that he might be the same Sebastian of Grammy's memories, a violent pain gripped me. My lungs constricted, and I found myself gasping for air until the water itself became a savior. I managed to pull myself back to the pool's edge, where Roman reappeared, his eyes wide with alarm as he took in the surreal scene. "What the hell is going on?" he demanded. Between choked breaths, I explained the impossible. Grammy's fish people were real. His disbelief turned to horror as he watched the merman. No, not a merman at all, but something far darker, gradually transform before our eyes. When I discovered that the creature's secret wasn't magic at all, but a parasitic infection twisting human bodies into water-bound abominations. My stomach churned. Roman's transformation began subtly, a trace of green on his cheek, then skin hardening into scales. Desperation replaced our initial fascination as the merman calmly explained that without the sea's embrace, Roman's body would wither beyond repair. In a moment of panic and grim determination, I retrieved a knife. Though every instinct screamed against it, I made a cut, following the creature's cold instructions to allow Roman's body to adapt. The act felt monstrous, and when I saw tiny, worm-like creatures writhing from his wound, I realized we were dealing with something that defied every natural law. As Roman's anguished pleas filled the air, I carried him to the shallow end and watched, numb, as the merman began the final transformation. Roman's body fused, his limbs merging into a tail, his eyes turning vacant. I wanted to scream, to beg for mercy from this relentless horror, but my voice was lost in the chaos. In the days that followed, the house was never the same. Roman's disappearance was chalked up to a drowning, and while my parents planned to rent out the house for summer parties, I couldn't bear the thought of another soul stepping near the cursed pool. I spent every weekend scrubbing away the memory of bloodstains and broken dreams, yet the pool remained a magnet for the curious and the damned. Only recently, as spring break arrived, I returned to inspect the property. The cement patio was wet with rain and something else. Leaning casually against the pool's edge was a figure whose tail glistened in a sickly green-blue hue. My heart sank as I realized that the nightmare wasn't over. The grotesque parasite that had twisted Roman was still out there, lurking in the shallow water, drawing unsuspecting souls toward its malevolent tide. I stared at the creature as Roman's mocking laughter echoed from beneath the surface, a sound that blended human misery with the call of the deep. I scrambled for my phone to call my parents, but the sound of children's excited footsteps grew louder. One by one, they rushed toward the pool like moths to a flame. Their laughter and splashes soon turned to desperate screams as they vanished beneath the surface. Locked in my room, the world outside was unnaturally silent. I couldn't escape the merman's final words that still rang in my ears. 15 minutes. That's how long it takes for a human to lose their legs. I realized then that the curse was spreading, and with every new victim, the line between myth and reality blurred a little more. I sit here now, trembling in the silence, haunted by the realization that some legends never die, they only change form. I never imagined that a place dedicated to history and art could harbor such unspeakable horrors. Yet, that is exactly what I found on my second night as a night guard at the Marlow Historical Museum, a sprawling institution housed in an imposing neoclassical building with aging stone walls, soaring ceilings, and halls that wind like a labyrinth of memories. What I witnessed that night defies explanation, and the horror of what I encountered still haunts my every waking moment. It all began like any other shift on a brisk November evening. I had returned to the museum for a second job after losing my previous position in a less reputable security firm. The museum staff assured me that it was merely an institution of art and antiquities, where nothing more supernatural than the occasional dripping water or creaking floorboards occurred. I believed them then, despite my own uneasy gut feeling that suggested something was very, very wrong beneath the polished facade. That night, my tasks were standard: secure the exhibits, monitor the halls, and ensure that all the doors remained locked. However, the museum's layout was different on the historical wing, an area rarely visited by the public. This wing held collections that chronicled local legends, lost civilizations, and mysterious relics with origins that spanned centuries. Rumor had it that some artifacts here carried curses or were linked to tragic pasts, but these were dismissed as tall tales by most. I, however, felt a sense of foreboding every time I passed its heavy oak doors with brass plaques engraved with archaic symbols. At exactly 10:30 p.m., I set out for my first round. I passed through the grand entrance hall, its crystal chandeliers casting quivering reflections onto the polished marble floor. Portraits of long-dead benefactors and founders lined the walls, their eyes seemingly following me as I walked. I muttered a half-hearted greeting to one particularly stern-faced man in a faded waistcoat, but he offered no response, only the unchanging, cold stare of a painted remnant of history. The first exhibit I reached was the Hall of Lost Voices, a collection dedicated to objects said to capture the whispers of those who once lived. Artifacts here included an antique phonograph rumored to record echoes of past conversations, a cracked mirror that many believed showed the face of a deceased relative, and an ancient, ornate key said to unlock memories of long-forgotten souls. I paused at the phonograph display, unable to explain why the air around it felt charged, as if saturated with a secret energy. The brass horn of the machine shone eerily in the dim light, even though it hadn't been turned on in decades. A soft, rhythmic tapping echoed from somewhere in the distance. I checked my watch. It was 10:35 p.m. Assuming it was merely a power adjustment or the building settling, I continued my rounds. I rounded a corner and entered a narrow corridor lined with sealed glass cases containing artifacts of dubious provenance. A rusted, ancient dagger, a set of ceramic figurines with eyes that seemed too lifelike, and a faded tapestry embroidered with symbols I couldn't decipher. The corridor's lighting was unusually dim here, and as I stepped closer to a display of carved stone relics from a remote temple, I noticed that the air grew inexplicably cold. I could see my breath in the pale light, and my skin prickled with an involuntary shudder. Then I heard it, a single, breathy whisper. My heart thumped in my chest as I froze. The whisper was almost imperceptible, as if someone near my ear was saying, "Help me." I spun around, half expecting to see a person, but there was only the empty corridor and the incessant hum of the ancient fluorescent lights above. My rational mind insisted it was my imagination, triggered by the oppressive atmosphere of the museum and the endless hours of solitude. I took a shaky breath and resumed my inspection. A sign on the wall pointed me toward the private archives, a small set of locked rooms at the far end of the wing. This archive was off limits to visitors and meant for the inner circle of museum staff and curators only. Tonight, however, a malfunction in the security system had left the door ajar. I hesitated for only a moment before pulling it open. The air behind the door was heavy, thick with the scent of old paper, dust, and something else. I could not quite place it. It smelled faintly metallic and oddly sweet like decaying flowers. Inside the archive, boxes and filing cabinets were arranged meticulously. Among them, I spotted an antique leather-bound journal with its cover embossed in faded gold. Curiosity compelled me to pick it up. It was Harold Marlowe's personal diary, the founder of the museum, a man reputed for his obsession with esoteric knowledge, curses, and the unexplainable. I had heard rumors about his strange experiments and cryptic writings, but reading his first-hand account was something else entirely. The diary detailed late-night experiments, occult rituals performed in secret within the museum's sub-basement, and strange occurrences witnessed by Harold himself. One entry sent shivers down my spine. Dated October 31st, 1978, it read, "Tonight, the veil thins. The voices of those long-lost call from beyond. I must pay heed to their silent cries, for they demand release. The relics speak if one dares listen." As I flipped through subsequent pages, scribbles in shaky handwriting described events that defied logic, a spectral procession seen in the halls, disembodied figures wandering the corridors, and a ritual in the museum's crypt that ended with a bloodstain on an ancient stone altar bearing a single word, "Release." I set the journal down with trembling fingers as a sudden noise startled me. It was a deep, resonant thump, like the sound of heavy footsteps echoing in a cavern. The noise came from behind a thick velvet curtain that separated the archive from a small storeroom. With rational caution at war with a primal fear, I walked toward the curtain and pulled it aside. What I saw was a small room that I'd never noticed before. Its walls were lined with tattered posters from long discontinued exhibitions and dominated by a large, dusty mirror. The mirror itself was ornate, framed in carved oak with intricate patterns reminiscent of ancient runes. As I stared into the mirror, I thought I saw movement, a flicker of light, a shape passing behind me, only for the reflection to settle back into normalcy. I rubbed my eyes and backed away. The sound of the footsteps seemed to grow louder, now joined by faint, echoing whispers that sounded just beyond human comprehension. I felt a cold hand of dread grip my heart. Determined to maintain control, I grabbed my flashlight and headed back into the main corridor, leaving the secret room behind. I resumed my rounds, but every shadow and every unexpected sound now seemed loaded with menace. I passed through the gallery of timeless faces, where portraits and sculptures of historical figures appeared almost lifelike in the flickering light. As I approached a particularly somber sculpture of a long-forgotten monarch, I noticed that the eyes of the stone figure had a subtle gleam, as though tears, or something like them, were welling up. I froze for a moment, feeling that the statue was mourning, before its expression hardened back into its carved stoicism. It wasn't long before I noticed that the museum wasn't as empty as it should be. Footsteps, soft, deliberate, measured, followed my own. I stopped dead in a hallway lined with ancient tapestries depicting battles and legends. The footsteps paused, then resumed, always just out of sight. I called out, "Hello? Is someone there?" My echo was the only answer I received. The sense of being followed grew overwhelming. I turned quickly, but saw only the endless, dusty corridor. The lights overhead buzzed and hummed, and for a fleeting moment I thought I saw a pale face reflected in the glass of a display cabinet before it vanished. I ducked into a side room, locking the door behind me. In that room were the museum's minor treasures, a collection of coins from lost civilizations, and a series of ivory carvings that depicted mythical creatures. I sat on a worn bench and tried to calm my racing heart. My mind raced through the diary's passages and the strange events of the night. Had I awakened something that had been sleeping here for decades? Perhaps the museum was not simply filled with relics of the past, but with echoes of the old, dark magic that Harold Marlowe had dabbled in. I remembered his repeated insistence about release and wondered if the footsteps I heard were not human at all, but those of an entity bound to the artifacts, waiting for its chance to slip free from its ancient chains. With little choice but to confront whatever was pursuing me, I gathered my nerve and cautiously opened the door. The corridor was in shadow, illuminated only by the occasional flash of lightning from an approaching storm outside. The air had grown thick, as though time itself had slowed. I crept down the hall, every nerve alert to the rustle of fabric or the whisper of voices. The flickering lights played tricks on my eyes. For one dreadful moment, I saw the image of a small girl in a tattered dress, her eyes hollow and pleading, standing in the middle of the corridor. I blinked and she was gone. I reached what I believed was the exit door to the main hall. My hands shook as I tried the handle, but it wouldn't budge. The door felt as if it had grown heavy with the weight of years and something else, something intangible and malevolent. I pounded on it, calling out for help, but the silence that followed was absolute, as if the entire building was swallowing my cries. With no other option, I slipped through a side door and found myself in a dim corridor I had never seen before, one that twisted and curved unnaturally, with walls that seemed to pulse with an almost organic texture. The corridor opened into a vast chamber that felt like a cross between a museum atrium and a tomb. At its center, on a marble pedestal, was an enormous, intricately carved sarcophagus. The lid, decorated with strange symbols and figures of anguished faces, was slightly ajar. An icy draft escaped from the gap, carrying with it a faint sound like a chorus of sorrowful, distant cries. I approached the pedestal with a mixture of dread and morbid curiosity. As I reached out to touch the cold stone, the lid creaked loudly and swung fully open. Inside, instead of a mummy, lay a collection of aged photographs and personal belongings, a life once lived, now abandoned to time. Among the items was a single, ornate locket, and when I picked it up, I felt an inexplicable weight settle on my soul. The locket was engraved with the initials HM, and its glass was cracked, reflecting my terrified face back at me. Suddenly, a series of disembodied voices erupted around me, overlapping and indistinct. They spoke in hushed tones, pleas, confessions, and accusations, and all at once, the chamber plunged into complete darkness. I fumbled for my flashlight, activating it just in time to reveal that the pedestal was now surrounded by figures in tattered clothing, their eyes vacant yet filled with unspeakable sorrow. They reached out with skeletal hands, their movements jerky and unnatural, as if they were marionettes controlled by a malevolent puppeteer. I backed away slowly, my heart pounding so loud it drowned out the whispers in my ears. One of the figures, an elderly man with a gaunt face and eyes that burned like coals, stepped forward and raised a hand in a trembling gesture that seemed both inviting and horrifying. His mouth opened in a silent scream, a soundless warning that chilled me to the core. In a burst of adrenaline-fueled terror, I turned and fled down the corridor. The voices trailed behind me, rising in intensity until they became a deafening cacophony of dread. I sprinted through twisting hallways that now resembled the inside of a living maze, where doors led to dead ends and windows revealed not the outside world, but other, darker corridors filled with shifting, spectral images. At every turn, I sensed unseen eyes watching, and I swore I felt icy fingers brush against my skin. After what felt like an eternity of running, I found myself back at the main atrium. The storm outside was raging, rain beating against the tall windows, and lightning illuminating the shadows that clung to the museum's walls. I collapsed onto a cold stone bench, gasping for breath as I struggled to piece together what had happened. The entire museum seemed to pulse with a malevolent rhythm, as though it were a living entity, one that had awoken from a long slumber and was now hungering for release from the confines of its dark history. In the following days, I couldn't shake the memories of that night. I found myself drawn to research the history of the Marlowe Museum and its mysterious founder, Harold Marlowe. I discovered that Harold had been rumored to be involved in occult practices and that he had amassed many cursed relics over his lifetime. Old newspaper clippings spoke of unexplained phenomena within the museum's walls, of lights flickering in empty corridors and voices heard among the exhibits after closing time. There were even accounts from former staff members who, like me, had witnessed figures moving in the darkness. Yet none of these testimonies were ever taken seriously, dismissed as overactive imaginations or the result of isolation. I began to question whether I had merely imagined the terror of that night, or if I had truly glimpsed into something far more ancient and inexplicable. My dreams turned into vivid nightmares, endless corridors stretching into infinity, the sound of ghostly laughter echoing in the void, and that single, sorrowful gaze of the old man from the sarcophagus chamber. I woke up drenched in sweat, unable to shake the feeling that something had followed me home. One evening, unable to bear the torment any longer, I returned to the museum during the day, determined to confront the horror face to face. The museum was closed to the public, and a lone custodian meandered through the galleries as if in a daze. I managed to slip past him and entered the historical wing. The atmosphere was utterly different in daylight. Colors were more vibrant, and the oppressive feeling had lessened, replaced by a mundane sense of antiquity. Yet, as I approached the private archives once again, I felt a familiar coldness creeping over me. In a glass case on display was an old photograph of Harold Marlowe, his eyes intense and unnerving. In the background of the photo, barely visible, was a shadowed figure that looked disturbingly similar to the specter I had encountered that night. I stared at it for what seemed like hours, trying to decipher its form, until a sudden movement at the edge of my vision caused me to spin around. For a brief, horrifying moment, I saw a face contorted in pain and malice, and then it was gone. That image seared itself into my mind, a constant reminder of the curse that seemed to infect the very air of the museum. I left the building that afternoon with a heavy heart and a mind racing with unanswered questions. I knew I could no longer work there. The building had become a living nightmare that refused to let go of its dark secrets. In the weeks that followed, I became obsessed with the history of the museum and the possibility that Harold Marlowe's experiments had opened a door to something beyond our realm, a door that was never meant to be opened. I scoured archives, old newspapers, and online forums, piecing together accounts from other night guards, former employees, and even local residents who claimed that the museum was cursed. The more I read, the more I realized that I wasn't the first to encounter these horrors, and tragically, I might not be the last. One account, posted on a creepy horror forum, detailed the tragic fate of another security guard who had mysteriously vanished after working a night shift in the same museum decades ago. His friends reported hearing bizarre sounds coming from the museum long after he was gone, and later, when his belongings were found in a storage closet deep within the building, they were covered in an unexplainable layer of dust and dried blood. Other stories recounted the strange phenomenon of exhibits rearranging themselves overnight, the sound of footsteps echoing in empty corridors, and even visitors who claimed to have seen figures wandering among the relics during guided tours. I began to notice signs that the building itself might be alive, a pulsing beat echoing from the walls, the creaking floors that seemed to whisper in a language long forgotten. Some nights, I'd wake up to the sound of my own voice, softly repeating phrases I never knew I'd learned, as though the museum's dark legacy was imprinting itself upon my mind. I tried to resist, tried to forget what I had seen, but the memories were relentless. Now, I write this to warn anyone who might one day find themselves working in, or even visiting the Marlowe Historical Museum. What you witness within its walls may be more than a trick of the light or a figment of an overactive imagination. Some histories are buried so deep that disturbing them unleashes forces far beyond human control. The Museum of Forgotten Whispers is not a mere building filled with artifacts. It is a living repository of sorrow and terror, of unfulfilled cries from the past that claw their way back into the present. If you ever find yourself alone in a dimly lit museum, take heed of every whisper and shadow. Do not let curiosity lead you down dark corridors where time, memory, and fate converge into a twisted nightmare. I have seen the horrors that lie hidden behind the polished exhibits and revered relics, and I know with unyielding certainty that some secrets are best left unspoken. Even now, as I sit in a safe apartment far from that accursed place, I can still feel the museum's presence haunting me. In the dead of night, when the silence is almost suffocating, I sometimes hear faint echoes, disembodied voices reciting Harold Marlowe's desperate words from decades ago. I wonder if the museum's curse has taken root in my soul, doomed to follow me wherever I go. I urge you to be cautious with your own curiosity. What if the next time you find a door left ajar or a corridor that seems to twist into nothingness, you open it and release something that was never meant to leave its eternal prison? The relics may be silent, but the whispers they carry are anything but. I share my story not for fame or pity, but as a testament to the dangers that lurk in the forgotten corners of our past. The Marlowe Museum isn't just a collection of historical items. It's a mausoleum for memories that refuse to die, and every night it awaits the next unwary soul to cross its threshold and awaken the horrors within. Remember this: never trust a place where history seems to breathe, where echoes of the past become voices in the night. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed again, and some whispers, once heard, will follow you forever. I write these words as both a confession and a caution. The Museum of Forgotten Whispers continues to haunt my every dream and shadow my every step. I pray that by recounting these horrifying events, I might spare someone else from the same fate, and remind you all that some secrets of the past are best left in darkness.